Hello, I'm Arthur Reed. Welcome to the World War II History Channel, where we explore the pivotal moments and untold stories of the greatest generation. The wind coming off the English Channel always feels coldest when you are waiting for a storm you cannot see. Imagine, if you will, the edge of the world. The great, white chalk cliffs of the southern coast, standing like ancient sentinels against the rhythmic, heavy breathing of the dark sea below. It is the summer of 1940, but the warmth of the season seems to have been swallowed by the vast, quiet apprehension settling over the rolling hills and quiet villages of Britain. Stand here on the edge of the cliff in the twilight. The sky is a deep, bruised purple, slowly giving way to the velvet black of night. Below, the water churns in soft, rhythmic whispers against the rocks. In another time, this would be a place of evening strolls, of children collecting shells, of lovers watching the stars emerge one by one. But tonight, the shoreline is empty of laughter. It is filled, instead, with a heavy, collective holding of breath. All across the country, millions of ordinary people are preparing for the dark. They are pulling thick, heavy blackout curtains across their windows, sealing themselves away from the outside world. They are carefully pinning the edges, making sure not a single sliver of warm, golden lamplight escapes into the street. It is a strange, delicate ritual of love and fear. They are hiding their homes, hiding their sleeping children, hiding their entire lives from the sky above. Inside these hushed homes, the wireless radio glows with a soft, amber warmth in the corner of the sitting room. Families sit close together, listening to the crackle of static, waiting for news, waiting for a voice of reassurance. Mothers knit quietly by the fire, the soft click-clack of the needles serving as a rhythm to steady their racing hearts. Fathers sit with a cup of tea that has long grown cold, their eyes staring into the hearth, silently calculating how they will protect the ones they love if the shadows finally break across their doorstep. But out here, on the damp, grassy edge of the cliffs, there is no firelight. There are only the young men in thick woolen coats, their collars turned up against the biting wind. Let us look at one of them. We will call him Thomas. Thomas is barely 20 years old. A few months ago, he was a baker's apprentice in a quiet village, his hands dusted with flour, his days measured by the rising of dough and the ringing of the shop bell. Now, his hands are numb with the coastal chill, wrapped tightly around a pair of heavy binoculars. He stands perfectly still, staring out over the vast, empty expanse of the dark water. In his breast pocket, close to his beating heart, rests a letter from his mother. It arrived this morning, smelling faintly of lavender and home. She wrote about the garden, about how the roses are blooming beautifully this year, and how she saved a bit of sugar to make his favorite biscuits when he returns. It is a fiercely ordinary letter, and that is precisely what makes it so incredibly precious. Thomas touches the fabric over his pocket, feeling the crinkle of the paper beneath his cold fingers. It grounds him. It reminds him of the quiet, beautiful world he is standing in the dark to protect. Thomas squints into the blackness. He is listening. He is listening for a low, mechanical hum in the distance. The terrible, droning sound of engines that would mean the storm has finally arrived. The isolation of this vigil is profound. The wind masks all other sounds, leaving him alone with his thoughts, his private fears, and the immense, invisible weight of a nation resting on his young shoulders. Yet, Thomas is not entirely alone. Up and down the coastline, hidden in the shadows of the hills and the folds of the land, there are strange, silent structures reaching up into the night sky. Tall, delicate webs of steel and wire, humming with a quiet, invisible energy. And nestled beneath these metal giants are small, wooden huts, sealed tightly against the wind. Inside these huts, the air is warm and smells of ozone and strong tea. Here, another kind of watcher sits in the dark. Let us quietly step inside one of these dimly lit rooms. The only illumination comes from the strange, eerie green glow of a cathode ray tube. Sitting before it is Evelyn, a young woman who, just a year ago, was studying literature at university. Her life was filled with poetry, with the rustle of library pages, with the soft light of the reading room. Now, she wears a heavy headset, her eyes fixed entirely on the glowing green screen before her. Evelyn is an operator of a secret new machine. A shield woven not of iron, but of invisible waves sent out into the dark to touch the unseen and bring back a whisper of its presence. It is a miracle of modern thought, a beacon of hope that is supposed to pierce the night and see the danger long before Thomas can hear it on the wind. But as Evelyn watches the flickering green line, a quiet, dreadful knot tightens in her stomach. She traces the glowing blips with a trembling finger. The screen is filled with ghosts. The machine stutters. It shows shadows where there is nothing, and it leaves vast, terrifying blanks where danger might be hiding. It is temperamental, fragile, and deeply, deeply flawed. Evelyn knows the terrible truth that is only whispered in the highest, most secret corridors of power. This miraculous shield, this secret weapon that the nation is secretly counting on, is broken. When the weather turns, when the clouds gather, the machine is blinded. She sits there in the green glow, her heart aching with a silent plea. She thinks of the boys out on the cliffs, relying on her to warn them. She thinks of the families asleep under their blackout curtains, trusting that someone is watching over them. Evelyn gently taps the glass of the screen, almost as if trying to wake the machine up, trying to coax it into working. "Please," she whispers to the glowing dust motes dancing in the dim light. "Please, just show me what is out there." It is a quiet, devastating burden to carry. The realization that the armor is cracked, right before the sword falls. And yet, Evelyn does not leave her post. She rubs her tired eyes, sits up a little straighter, and continues to watch. She writes a quick, comforting note to the operator sitting beside her, passing it over in the dark. Just a small drawing of a smiling cat, a tiny moment of shared humanity and quiet resilience in a room thick with anxiety. They share a brief, tired smile, and turn back to the green light. So much of the war was fought exactly like this, not in the loud clash of daylight, but in the quiet, hidden spaces. In the shadows. In small rooms with young men and women carrying the weight of the world in absolute secrecy. It makes you realize how many hidden truths, how many unseen struggles, were kept tucked away to keep the world safe. If you find yourself drawn to these hidden stories, the quiet heroism that took place far away from the headlines, I would love to share something special with you. I have a weekly email newsletter where we explore these forgotten depths together, and when you join our little community, I will send you a free copy of my ebook, The Shadow War: 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. It is filled with incredible, true stories of everyday people doing extraordinary, secret things in the dark. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a small way we can continue this journey into history together, safely. Back in the hushed, darkened room on the coast, the clock ticks slowly toward midnight. Evelyn takes a sip from a tin cup of tea, letting the warmth spread through her chest. She watches the green pulse of the screen. A sweep of light. A scattering of scattered signals. A long, agonizing pause. Outside, the wind begins to settle. The thick clouds above the English Channel finally begin to part, revealing a breathtaking canopy of silver stars. They look exactly as they did 100 years ago, entirely indifferent to the fears of the people below. Thomas, standing on the cliff's edge, looks up at that vast, glittering expanse. He takes a slow, deep breath of the cold, salty air. He thinks of the warm kitchen of his childhood, of his mother's hands, of the soft, reassuring ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. He holds onto those memories tightly. They are his anchor in the swirling uncertainty of the night. He knows that somewhere behind him, in the dark, brilliant minds are awake. He has to believe that someone, somewhere, is working to fix the invisible shield. He has to believe that they will not be left entirely in the dark when the dawn finally comes. For now, the night is quiet. The storm is still hiding just beyond the horizon. The cliff stands firm against the sea. Thomas adjusts his collar, lifts his binoculars once more, and settles into the long, beautiful, terrible silence of the watch. There is a peculiar, quiet magic in believing that the sky itself is watching over you. As the deep, bruised purple of the twilight gives way to the soft, golden haze of morning, a new silhouette begins to rise along the gentle curves of the coastline. For weeks, the villagers have watched the slow, deliberate construction of these strange, soaring structures. They do not look like weapons. They are not heavy with armor, nor do they bristle with threat. Instead, they are delicate webs of iron and steel, stretching high into the clouds like the bare branches of winter trees, catching the first light of the sun. To the fishermen pulling their boats onto the shingle, and to the farmers tending their sheep in the rolling green valleys, these tall, silent masts are a mystery. But to the young men and women waiting in the shadows of the war, these iron spires represent something entirely different. They are the physical manifestation of a promise. They are a monument to hope. Before these towers appeared, the sky was an endlessly terrifying expanse. The young pilots who were tasked with guarding the clouds had to fly in constant, exhausting circles. Imagine the bone-deep weariness of those early days. Boys who were barely out of school, bundled in heavy leather jackets and layers of thick, scratchy wool, climbing into cramped, freezing cockpits before the sun even rose. They would fly for hours in the blinding blue, straining their eyes against the glare of the sun, searching for a speck of danger in an ocean of empty air. It was a cold, lonely existence. The constant hum of the engine vibrating in their teeth, the frost creeping across the edges of the canopy, the heavy, sinking feeling in the chest that they were searching for a needle in a limitless haystack. They would return to the airfields with their eyes bloodshot, their hands trembling from the cold and the sheer nervous exhaustion of waiting for a phantom to appear. It was a burden that was slowly breaking their spirits, wearing down their resilience, day by long, terrifying day. But then, the iron towers began to hum. It was an invisible change at first. No grand announcements, no parades. Just a quiet shift in the routine. Let us look at a young pilot named Arthur. He sits in the doorway of a wooden dispersal hut on the edge of a wide, grassy airfield. The morning air is still damp with dew, smelling sweetly of crushed clover and the faint, metallic tang of engine oil. Arthur is not in his airplane. He is sitting in a worn, comfortable armchair that someone had dragged out from a village parlor. In his hands, he holds a steaming mug of milky tea. The warmth of the ceramic seeps into his cold fingers. Beside him, a friend is quietly reading a paperback novel, the pages soft and dog-eared from being passed around a dozen different hands. Another boy is absently plucking a soft, melancholic tune on an old guitar. They are resting. They are breathing. And above all, they are waiting, unburdened by the terrifying necessity of searching the sky themselves. They know that miles away, standing tall on the white chalk cliffs, the iron towers are doing the searching for them. They have been told that these strange, beautiful structures cast an invisible net across the English Channel. A net that can feel the disturbance of the air, a net that can reach out into the misty distance and touch the shadows before they ever reach the shore. Arthur takes a slow sip of his tea and watches a small, white butterfly dance across the airfield grass. He feels a profound, almost overwhelming sense of relief wash over his shoulders. The crushing weight of the infinite sky has been lifted. He knows that he does not have to throw himself into the cold blue void until he is needed. He can sit here, feeling the morning sun warm his face, trusting in the silent, invisible magic of the iron net. He feels protected. He feels, for the first time in months, that they might actually survive this. This hope is not just felt on the grassy airfields. It radiates downward, deep into the hidden, windowless rooms beneath the earth, where the true guardians of this new magic sit in hushed, reverent concentration. Let us step gently back into that world of glowing green screens and quiet whispers. We find Margaret, a quiet, thoughtful woman with a soft voice and a steady hand. She sits in the warm, dim light of the operations room, a heavy headset resting against her ears. The room smells of warm dust and the faint, sweet scent of the violet perfume she dabs on her wrists each morning to remind her of her mother's garden. Margaret does not see the war through a gun sight, nor does she hear the roar of engines. Her war is reduced to a delicate dance of light on a glass screen. But she understands, with a fierce and tender maternal protectiveness, exactly what those flickers of light mean. She knows that every time she traces a line across the glass with her chinograph pencil, she is holding an invisible thread connected to a boy like Arthur, sitting miles away. The machine she operates is a marvel to her. It is a gift of science, a brilliant beacon of human ingenuity forged in iron and wire. When the system sings perfectly, when the signals are clear and bright, she feels like an angel sitting on the shoulder of every pilot in the sky. There is an incredible intimacy in this unseen connection. When Margaret presses the button on her microphone to speak to the airfields, she deliberately softens her voice. She knows the boys in the clouds are frightened. She knows they are far from home. So, she speaks to them not as a commanding officer, but as a sister, a friend, a steadying hand in the dark. Vector 200, she murmurs softly into the microphone, her voice a calm, soothing ripple in the crackling static of the radio. Take care, boys. I have my eyes on you. And miles above the earth, in a vibrating, freezing cockpit, a young pilot hears her voice. It is a lifeline dropped into the abyss. It is the sound of home. He knows that somewhere, safe on the ground, a girl named Margaret is watching over him. He is not alone in the vast, terrifying blue. The iron towers have tethered him to the earth, to humanity, to a quiet, invisible care that wraps around him like a heavy, warm blanket. It takes an immense amount of time, care, and delicate research to sift through the ashes of the past and uncover these quiet, beautiful moments. History so often remembers only the loud, crashing moments of conflict, but I have always believed that the true story of U.S. is found in these soft whispers of hope, in the letters home, and in the gentle voices crackling over an old radio. If you find comfort in these forgotten stories, and if you would like to help support the massive amount of research it takes to bring these quiet moments of everyday heroism back to life, I have a small tip jar on Ko-Fi. Even the smallest gesture helps keep this history alive, allowing me to continue weaving these bedtime stories of the past for you. But please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Your support, your presence here, and your willingness to listen to these quiet echoes means more to me than words can say. As the days turn into weeks, this beautiful, fragile hope begins to blossom across the countryside. It is a quiet euphoria, a collective sigh of relief breathed out by thousands of tired souls. In the evenings, when the twilight returns to the cliffs, Arthur sits at a small, wobbly wooden desk in his barracks. The room is quiet, save for the soft snoring of a friend in the next bed and the gentle patter of a light summer rain against the window pane. Arthur uncaps his fountain pen, smooths out a piece of thin, crinkling paper, and begins to write a letter to his younger sister. You would not believe the magic we have here, he writes, his handwriting looping and careful. They have built these great, sweeping towers along the coast. They look like the metal skeletons of giants, standing watch in the mist. We don't have to fly blindly anymore, little bird. The towers listen to the sky for us. They tell us exactly where to go. It is as if a great, protective hand has been placed over our little island. For the first time since this all began, my heart is quiet. I am sleeping deeply. Do not worry for me anymore. I am safe. We are all safe. He folds the letter carefully, slipping it into an envelope, sealing it with a quiet prayer. He lays his head back on his pillow, listening to the rain, and drifts into a deep, untroubled sleep. And out on the cliffs, the iron towers stand tall against the night. The rain washes over their steel girders, dripping softly into the wet grass below. Inside the warm, dimly lit huts, the operators sip their tea and watch the steady, reassuring glow of the green screens. Everything seems perfect. The brilliant minds of the nation have built a shield. They have conquered the darkness with wires and glass and invisible waves of energy. The young men are resting. The country is breathing softly under its blackout curtains. The hope forged in iron is holding strong, wrapping the coast in a warm, protective embrace. It is a beautiful illusion. A quiet, necessary slumber before the breaking of the dawn. For a little while longer, let us leave them here, resting in the gentle glow of their faith, safe in the comforting belief that the sky has finally been tamed. There is a uniquely heavy silence that falls when a promise is broken in the dark. For a little while, the island had breathed a collective sigh of relief, wrapped in the comforting illusion of their invisible, iron shield. The great towers along the coast had stood like silent guardians, and the young men resting on the grassy airfields had finally slept without the phantom roar of engines ringing in their ears. It was a beautiful, fragile peace. But the skies over the English Channel are notoriously fickle, and nature, it seems, keeps its own counsel. It begins with a change in the wind. The warm, gentle breezes of late summer give way to the damp, heavy breath of the sea. Thick, rolling banks of fog begin to crawl over the white chalk cliffs, spilling down into the valleys and settling over the airfields like a thick, gray blanket. The rain follows. Not a violent storm, but a quiet, persistent drizzle that blurs the horizon and turns the world into a canvas of soft, smudged watercolors. Inside the wooden huts nestled beneath the towering iron masts, the air grows thick with a new, quiet kind of tension. Let us sit beside a young operator named William. William is a quiet soul, a boy who used to spend his afternoons repairing pocket watches in his father's shop, marveling at the delicate, interlocking gears. He has a mind that seeks order, a heart that finds comfort in things working exactly as they should. He is sitting in the dim, warm glow of the operations room, the heavy headset pressing against his ears, his eyes locked on the green cathode ray tube. Outside, the rain taps softly against the reinforced glass of the single, small window. It is a soothing rhythm, a lullaby of the English countryside. But inside, on William's glowing green screen, the rhythm is unraveling. When the sky was clear, the screen was a marvel of clarity. The line of light would sweep across the glass, and any danger approaching from the sea would appear as a distinct, pulsing spike. A clear, undeniable warning. But now, as the heavy clouds gather and the rain falls, the magic begins to falter. The invisible waves of energy sent out by the great towers are bouncing off the rain, reflecting off the dense fog, and scattering against the rolling waves of the channel. William watches, his stomach tying into a slow, tight knot, as the screen fills with what they call snow. The beautiful, clear green line dissolves into a chaotic, fuzzy wash of light. The spikes of warning are swallowed up by the noise of the weather. The ghosts have returned. He gently taps the glass of the screen, just as Evelyn had done weeks before, as if he can somehow brush the static away with his fingertips. "Come on," he whispers into the quiet room. "Show me. Just show me." But the machine is blind. The fatal flaw of this magnificent, secret weapon has revealed itself. It works perfectly when the sun shines and the sky is a brilliant, empty blue. But when the weather turns foul, when the clouds drop low and the mist hides the world, which is exactly when an attack is most likely to come, the shield crumbles into glowing green dust. The realization settles over the room like a physical weight. The operators share quiet, fearful glances in the dim light. They know what this means. They know that the invisible net they have cast over the ocean is torn, and that the young men they have sworn to protect are, once again, entirely exposed. Up in the air, the reality of this broken promise is terrifyingly cold. Let us return to Arthur, the young pilot who had written to his sister of the magic towers. He is flying today. The sky is a soup of heavy, gray clouds. The condensation streaks across his canopy, blurring the world outside until there is nothing but shifting shadows and the gray, empty void. He is flying on instruments alone, his hands gripping the controls, trusting the quiet, steady voice of the girl on the radio to guide him through the mist. Vector 200, she had told him when he took off. Climb through the cloud bank, Arthur. I have you. But as he pushes his machine higher, swallowed entirely by the dense, gray fog, the radio crackles with a new, hesitant tone. Arthur, the voice comes through the static, and all the warm, maternal confidence is gone. It is replaced by a soft, trembling apology. Arthur, I have lost you in the clutter. I cannot see you. Imagine the profound, freezing loneliness of that moment. Sitting alone in a vibrating metal box, thousands of feet above the dark, churning water, wrapped in a blinding gray mist, and hearing the only thread connecting you to home suddenly snap. The shield is gone. He is flying blind in a sky that could be filled with shadows, and there is no one left to warn him. Arthur's heart hammers against his ribs, loud enough that he feels he can hear it over the roar of the engine. He does not panic. There is no room for panic here. He simply breathes in the cold, metallic air of the cockpit, tightens his grip, and continues to fly into the unknown, carrying the heavy, terrifying knowledge that they are on their own once more. When we reflect on these immense, oceanic struggles, where the weather and the sea and the sky played such heavy roles in the fates of so many, it can be helpful to see these histories brought to life visually. For those of you who are passionate about the history of the Second World War, I often find that watching a beautifully crafted film or holding a piece of carefully preserved memorabilia helps connect us to these distant echoes. If you are looking to immerse yourself further, I highly recommend watching the movie Midway on Amazon Prime or exploring their collection of historical keepsakes. It is a striking visual reminder of the bravery required to face the vast, unpredictable oceans and skies of that era. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a wonderful way to honor the past from the quiet comfort of your home. When Arthur finally lands, breaking through the bottom of the clouds to see the wet, grassy runway rushing up to meet him, he is exhausted. His hands shake as he pulls off his leather helmet. The airfield is quiet. The rain continues to fall. That evening, the atmosphere in the barracks is different. The paperback novels remain unread. The guitar leans silently in the corner. The boys sit on their narrow beds, wrapping themselves in thick woolen blankets against the damp chill, listening to the rain drumming against the roof. The magic has faded. Arthur pulls a fresh sheet of paper from his drawer to write home again, but his pen hovers over the page. How does he tell his little sister that the giants standing in the mist are blind? How does he explain that the protective hand over their island is slipping? He cannot. The burden of this secret is too heavy to share with those who are resting peacefully under their blackout curtains. So, he writes of the rain. He writes of the awful tea in the mess hall. He asks if the stray cat they used to feed has come back to the porch. He writes a fiercely ordinary letter to protect the illusion of safety, bearing the weight of the truth entirely alone. Across the room, another pilot catches Arthur's eye. The boy gives a small, tired smile, stands up, and walks over with a battered tin thermos. He pours a measure of hot, sweet tea into Arthur's cup without saying a word. It is a small, quiet moment of profound understanding. A shared acknowledgement that the magic is broken, but they are still here. They will still fly into the gray tomorrow. In the secret corridors of power, far from the rain-soaked airfields, the truth is a bitter pill. The men who built the towers, the commanders who placed their faith in the iron webs, sit in smoky, windowless rooms, staring at maps and weather charts. The anxiety is palpable. They have built a beautiful, incredibly complex lock, but the enemy has realized the door is made of paper when it rains. The search for a cure becomes a desperate, whispered plea. They need a miracle. Not a towering monument of iron, but a quiet, elegant fix. Something that can pierce the fog, something that can see through the rain, something that can give the boys back their eyes in the dark. As the night deepens, the rain turns to a fine, cold mist. The towers on the cliffs hum softly, their invisible waves still casting out into the void, bouncing uselessly off the clouds. The watchers keep watching, squinting at the green static, hoping against hope that the storm will break. The island holds its breath once more, hiding behind a cracked shield, waiting for a light to pierce the gathering gloom. The heaviest weight in the world is the silence left behind by someone who is not coming home. For days, the mist has clung to the coastline like a shroud. It is not the soft, romantic fog of a quiet winter morning, but a thick, damp grayness that seems to swallow the world whole. It muffles the sounds of the birds, dampens the crunch of boots on the gravel, and makes the sprawling airfields feel as small and as isolated as a solitary boat lost at sea. The great iron towers on the cliffs are still standing, their invisible waves still reaching out into the gloom, but everyone now knows the heartbreaking truth. The mist has blinded them. The magnificent shield is cracked. Let us walk quietly into one of the long, curved wooden barracks at the edge of the airfield. The air inside is heavy with the smell of damp wool, coal smoke from the small stove in the center of the room, and the faint, lingering scent of boot polish. Usually, this room is filled with a nervous, youthful energy. There would be the sound of a worn deck of cards shuffling, a quiet argument over a crossword puzzle, the scratchy melody of a jazz record playing on a wind-up gramophone. But today, the gramophone is silent. The boys are sitting on their narrow cots, writing letters, reading books, or simply staring at the floorboards. At the far end of the room, there is an older man. We will call him Henry. He is a squadron leader, a man who has seen too many seasons of this terrible storm. Right now, he is sitting on the edge of a bed that does not belong to him. The blankets have been stripped away. The mattress is bare. Henry is performing the quietest, most agonizing duty of the war. He is packing away the life of a boy who slipped into the gray fog yesterday and simply never returned. There was no fiery dogfight. There was no grand, tragic battle in the sun. The boy had just flown out into the thick, blinding weather, relying on the voice of the girls in the radar rooms to guide him. But the screens had filled with static, the connection had snapped, and the boy had become lost in the endless, confusing soup of the sky. He ran out of fuel, or he lost his horizon. They will likely never know. He just faded away. Henry's large, calloused hands move with immense gentleness. He folds a thick, woolen sweater, one hand knitted, perhaps, by a mother or a sweetheart, the stitches uneven but filled with love. He places it carefully into a small cardboard box. Next comes a shaving kit, a tin of peppermint candies, and a half-read paperback novel with a piece of torn newspaper still marking the page where the boy had stopped reading just yesterday morning. It is these fierce, ordinary details that break the heart. The knowledge that a life, with all its hopes and quiet moments, can be reduced to a small cardboard box tied with brown string. Henry picks up a photograph from the bedside table. It is a picture of a smiling girl standing next to a bicycle on a sunny, cobbled street. He looks at it for a long time, the silence in the room pressing against his shoulders. He does not cry. The grief here is too deep, too exhausted for tears. It is a slow, hollow ache that settles in the chest and refuses to leave. Miles away, in the dark, warm operations rooms beneath the earth, that same hollow ache is felt by the girls staring at the green screens. They know when a light flickers and dies. They know when a voice on the radio turns panicked, then static, then completely silent. A young operator sits perfectly still, her hands resting in her lap. She is staring at the fuzzy, meaningless snow on her screen. Just hours ago, she was trying to guide that young pilot home. She had leaned close to the microphone, her voice steady and warm, pleading with the static, trying to cast a lifeline of words into the void. "Turn east," she had whispered into the dark. "Please, just turn east. I will find you." But the machine was blind. She was blind. And now, she has to carry the quiet, agonizing burden of wondering if she could have done something more, even when she knows it was the broken iron towers that failed them. Her supervisor, a kind woman with tired eyes, gently places a hand on her shoulder. A small squeeze. A silent understanding. There are no words to fix this. They must simply carry it, take a sip of strong tea, and wait for the next voice calling out from the dark. It is difficult to truly grasp the profound, quiet heartbreak of these days. So often, history paints these times with broad, triumphant strokes of glory and loud victories. But the reality of those years was lived in these hushed, devastating moments, in the empty beds, the unsent letters, and the harsh, unfiltered truth of human fragility. The real story is found in the shadows that the history books sometimes gloss over. If you are someone who wishes to look past the polished narratives and understand the true, raw human experience of these times, there are archives of unseen media, photographs and film that capture the uncensored reality of this era. I have curated a collection of these rare, deeply moving historical documents on Gumroad, for those who want to respectfully witness the unvarnished truth that is often too restricted or sensitive for conventional platforms. It is a solemn window into what these men and women truly endured. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a way to honor their actual, unfiltered sacrifices. Back in the quiet wooden hut, Henry finishes tying the string around the box. He slides it under the bare iron frame of the bed, out of sight. The other boys in the room have watched this ritual in silence. They do not speak of it. To speak of it would make the phantom presence in the room too real. Instead, a young pilot named James stands up, walks over to the small stove, and uses a thick cloth to pick up the heavy iron kettle. He pours the steaming water into a chipped enamel mug, drops in a spoonful of precious tea leaves, and walks over to Henry. James doesn't say a word. He simply holds out the warm mug. Henry looks up, his eyes meeting the younger man's. He takes the mug, the heat soaking into his cold, trembling hands. "Thank you, son," Henry whispers. James nods and goes back to his cot, opening a notebook to write a letter he hopes his mother will not have to read with the same grief that fills this room today. This is the everyday heroism that held the world together. It was not always found in the pulling of a trigger or the daring dive of an airplane. Most of the time, it was found in the quiet offering of a cup of tea. It was found in the choice to wake up the next morning, put on a damp woolen coat, and walk back out into the mist, knowing perfectly well that the shield was broken. The morale on the airfields and in the radar rooms is beginning to fray, like a worn piece of rope holding a ship to the dock in a storm. The fear of the enemy is one thing, that is a fear you can fight. But the fear of the blind fog, the fear of the failing machines, the fear of slipping into the gray and being forgotten, that is a fear that eats at the soul. As night falls, the rain begins again, a soft, relentless patter against the tin roof of the barracks. The men lie in the dark, listening to the water, feeling the cold dampness creeping into their bones. They are so desperately tired. They do not know that far away, in a cluttered, chaotic room filled with scattered papers and half-empty cups of coffee, someone is awake. They do not know that a brilliant, beautifully strange mind is currently staring at a chalkboard, obsessing over the very mist that is haunting their dreams. For now, the young men just pull their blankets up to their chins. They close their eyes, holding onto the memories of warm hearths and sunlit streets, whispering quiet prayers into the dark, waiting for someone to finally clear the shadows from the sky. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that settles deep in your bones when you know your decisions hold the weight of other men's lives. Far away from the damp cliffs and the quiet, grieving barracks, Deep beneath the cobblestone streets of London, the war looks entirely different. Here, there is no rain to wash away the tears, and no wind to scatter the fears. There is only the constant, low hum of ventilation fans, the smell of stale tobacco, and the warm, yellow glow of electric bulbs hanging from concrete ceilings. This is a hidden world of subterranean rooms, thick steel doors, and hushed, urgent voices. In one of these windowless rooms, an older man stands alone over a massive wooden table. We will call him Edward. Before the world grew dark, Edward was a man who loved to walk his spaniel through the quiet hills of the countryside. He was a man who enjoyed tending to his greenhouse, coaxing fragile orchids to bloom in the spring. Now, his greenhouse is entirely forgotten. His hair has turned from iron gray to snow white in what feels like the blink of an eye. Spread out across the table before him is a vast, beautiful map of the coastline, covered in dozens of small, painted wooden blocks. Each little block represents a group of young men. Each block is a collection of beating hearts, of boys like Arthur and Thomas, waiting in the cold. Edward leans his weight onto his hands, staring down at the map. His eyes are red-rimmed and hollow from too many nights spent chasing shadows. He knows the terrible truth about the iron towers on the coast. The reports have been coming into this bunker hour after agonizing hour. He has read the transcripts from the girls in the radar rooms, their voices reduced to typewritten words on flimsy paper, describing the terrible snow on their screens. He knows that the shield he promised his men is dissolving every time the clouds gather. It is a uniquely agonizing burden. To be a commander in a room perfectly safe from the falling bombs, knowing that the tools you have given your soldiers are failing them. Edward reaches into the pocket of his woolen trousers and pulls out his grandfather's pocket watch. It is small, brass, and worn smooth by generations of thumbs. He rubs the cool metal, a grounding ritual, as he listens to the steady tick-tick-tick. Time is slipping through his fingers like dry sand. The door creaks open, pulling him from his thoughts. A young clerk steps into the room, balancing a tray with a steaming pot of tea and a single, cracked ceramic cup. The boy cannot be older than 19. His uniform is slightly too large for his thin frame, and he has a smudge of ink on his cheek. The boy sets the tray down quietly. He doesn't say anything about the late hour or the tired slump of Edward's shoulders. He just pours the tea, pushing the warm cup gently toward the edge of the map. "Thank you, lad," Edward murmurs, his voice raspy from disuse. "Sir," the boy replies softly, lingering for just a moment. In that brief, silent exchange, there is an ocean of understanding. The boy knows the generals are struggling. The generals know the boys are frightened. It is a quiet, shared sorrow that binds them together in the earth. When the door clicks shut again, Edward takes a sip of the bitter tea. He walks over to a chalkboard covering the far wall. It is covered in complex diagrams, mathematical scribbles, and the frantic, erased ghosts of failed ideas. The greatest minds of the nation, professors, physicists, men in tweed suits who usually debate in the sunny courtyards of universities, have been brought down into these bunkers. They have spent weeks staring at this chalkboard, trying to find a way to fix the blind machines. They know what the problem is. The invisible waves the towers send out are simply too long. They are clumsy. They bounce off the water drops in the fog and the rain, returning nothing but noise. They need something shorter, something sharp and focused, a wave of energy so tight it can slice right through the storm and see the true shadows hiding behind the mist. But wanting a miracle and building one are two very different things. To create these shorter, sharper waves, they need an entirely new kind of device. A valve that can handle immense power without melting into useless slag. Every time they try to build it, the glass shatters. The metal warps. The theories collapse. Edward rests his forehead against the cold slate of the chalkboard. He feels completely helpless. The desperate search for a solution has hit a solid, unyielding brick wall, and every day they spend staring at it, more letters have to be packed into brown cardboard boxes on the coast. It is a heavy, quiet despair that rarely makes it into the grand, sweeping history books. The true weight of leadership in these dark hours was largely carried in complete silence, buried under the earth. The official records often polish over these sleepless nights, leaving behind only the polished victories. If you find yourself moved by these deeply hidden truths, and you wish to explore the unvarnished, raw history that goes beyond the textbook summaries, I invite you to join our close-knit history community on Patreon. There, we offer completely uncensored deep dives, full podcast episodes, and raw historical accounts that give a voice to these silent struggles. It is a wonderful space for us to gather and remember the past as it truly was. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Joining us there helps ensure these quiet, profound stories are never forgotten. The clock on the wall ticks softly toward 3 in the morning. Edward walks back to the map table. He gently picks up one of the wooden blocks sitting on the painted blue water of the channel. He turns it over in his hand. He imagines the cold cockpit. He imagines the terrible, blinding fog. He imagines the fear. He places the block carefully back down, exactly where it belongs. He cannot give up. The desperate search must continue. They will bring in more scientists. They will build new laboratories. They will test and fail again, until the wall finally breaks. They owe the boys in the air nothing less than a miracle. Edward sits down in the creaking wooden chair at his desk. He pulls a fresh stack of reports toward him, clicks his fountain pen, and begins to read. Outside the concrete walls, the world is still sleeping. The rain is still falling on the coast. The problem remains perfectly, terrifyingly unsolved. But hope is a strange, persistent thing. It rarely arrives with the sound of trumpets. Sometimes, hope is just a tired, gray-haired man sitting in a windowless room, drinking cold tea, and refusing to close his eyes. He does not yet know that miles away, far from the bunkers and the map tables, a quiet, eccentric mind is already holding the key to the impossible. The miracle is coming. They just have to hold on in the dark a little while longer. True brilliance rarely arrives with a shout. More often, it is found in the quiet, dusty corners of a room where someone has simply refused to stop wondering. Let us travel away from the biting winds of the coast, away from the damp airfields and the heavy, anxious bunkers hidden deep beneath the London streets. We are going to a quiet, sleepy town, where the ancient stones of a university stand resolute against the gentle nighttime rain. Here, the war feels like a distant, terrible rumor, muffled by ivy and old libraries. Climb the wooden stairs of one of these grand, old buildings. The steps creak softly beneath your feet, a familiar, comforting sound. At the very end of a long, dimly lit hallway, there is a single door slightly ajar, a sliver of warm, golden light spilling out onto the floorboards. Step inside. The room is a magnificent, beautiful chaos. It is a sanctuary of thought. Books are stacked in precarious, leaning towers on the floor. The chalkboard on the wall is a flurry of smudged chalk, a beautiful, abstract painting of numbers and symbols. On the large oak desk in the center of the room, amidst a sea of crumpled paper, brass fittings, and glass tubes, sits a cup of tea that has long since gone cold. And there, leaning over the desk, illuminated by the amber glow of a solitary lamp, is a man we will call John. John does not look like a savior. He wears a thick, knitted cardigan that is missing its bottom button, and his hair is perpetually rumpled, as if he has spent the entire day running his hands through it in deep frustration. He is not a general, and he has never fired a rifle. He is a quiet, gentle man who prefers the company of equations to the noise of a crowded room. To the stiff, uniformed men in the military command, John is just an eccentric academic, easily overlooked, a man whose head is forever lost in the clouds. But what they do not understand is that John's mind is a beautiful, unbound thing. While the military men try to solve the problem of the failing radar with brute force, trying to build bigger, louder, heavier machines, John sees the world differently. He does not look at the invisible waves of energy as something to be forced. He looks at them as something to be shaped, like a glassblower coaxing a delicate vase from a blazing fire. John stops his reading. He takes off his wire-rimmed glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose with a tired sigh. He turns his gaze to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, bending the streetlights outside into soft, blurry stars. He knows about the mist. He knows about the boys flying blind over the dark water. Though he sits in this safe, quiet room, his heart aches with a profound empathy for the young men on the coast. He listens to the evening news on his small wireless radio, hearing the carefully chosen words of the broadcaster, and he can read between the lines. He feels the phantom weight of the sky, just as Arthur and Thomas do. He wants to give them a lantern. He wants to build them a new pair of eyes, something that can pierce the heavy gloom and bring them safely back to Earth. He thinks of the military's failing attempts. They have been trying to push immense electrical power through traditional glass valves, hoping to create the short, sharp waves needed to see through the rain. But the power is too great. The glass simply melts, shattering under the intense, impossible heat. They are trying to shout into the dark, and they are destroying their own voices in the process. John picks up a simple, hollow brass cylinder from his desk. It is an ordinary object, something you might find in a plumber's workshop. He rolls it slowly between his fingers, feeling the cool, smooth metal. He brings it to his lips and blows softly across the opening, creating a low, resonant whistle. A gentle, quiet thought begins to blossom in his mind. What if, he wonders, we stopped trying to force the energy through fragile glass? What if, instead of shouting, we made the metal itself sing? What if we carved a labyrinth into a solid block of copper, a circle of tiny, hollow caves, and let the energy chase itself around and around, building up its own beautiful, resonant frequency, just like the breath swirling inside a whistle? It is a thought of profound, elegant simplicity. It is the kind of quiet, delicate idea that changes the course of human history, born not in a war room, but in the soft glow of a desk lamp, driven by a simple desire to keep people safe. It is remarkable how many of the war's greatest turning points were not born on the battlefield, but in the quiet, unassuming minds of people who were entirely hidden from the public eye. History is full of these shadow figures, ordinary people doing extraordinary things in absolute secrecy. I find these forgotten corners of history incredibly moving, and if you share this fascination with the unseen heroes, I would love to invite you to something very special. I write a weekly email newsletter where we uncover these quiet stories together, and as a welcome gift, I will send you my free ebook, The Shadow War: 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. It is a wonderful collection of these hidden triumphs. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a quiet way we can keep the memory of these hidden minds alive. John places the brass cylinder back onto his desk. He smooths out a fresh, blank sheet of paper, the crisp white surface glowing under the lamp. He picks up his pencil. For the first time in weeks, the heavy knot of helplessness in his chest begins to loosen. The fear that the mist will forever hide the danger starts to fade, replaced by the gentle, steady rhythm of a problem finally yielding to a solution. He begins to draw. Not complex, imposing machinery, but simple, graceful circles. A large circle, surrounded by smaller circles, connected by delicate, sweeping lines. It looks more like a drawing of a flower, or the intricate gears of a pocket watch, than a weapon of war. As he draws, he does not think of the generals or the politicians. He thinks of the girl in the damp wooden hut on the cliffs, staring at a screen of fuzzy snow. He thinks of the boy shivering in the freezing cockpit, surrounded by gray clouds, desperately waiting for a voice to guide him home. "Just hold on," John whispers softly into the quiet room, his pencil scratching a soothing, rhythmic sound across the paper. "Just hold on a little longer. I think I see a way." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimes a low, resonant note, signaling the early hours of the morning. The rest of the world is asleep, huddled beneath their heavy blackout curtains, dreaming of a peace that feels so very far away. But here, in this messy, beautiful room, the shadows are already beginning to retreat. A mind has been unbound. A spark has been struck in the dark. It is small, it is fragile, and it exists only on a piece of thin paper, but it is there. And as John leans closer to his drawing, losing himself entirely in the quiet magic of his creation, the rain outside seems to fall just a little bit softer. The deepest secrets of the universe often reveal themselves not in grand, echoing halls, but in the quiet, lonely hours when the rest of the world is fast asleep. If you were to walk through the damp, cobbled streets of the university town at this hour, you would see nothing but shadows. The great stone buildings stand silent, wrapped in the cool embrace of the night mist. But if you were to wander down a narrow, unassuming alleyway behind the physics department, you would notice a single, frosted window glowing with a faint, warm light. Let us slip quietly inside. The air in this small, drafty workshop smells entirely different from the musty libraries or the polished wood of the lecture halls. Here, the air is thick with the scent of warm machine oil, metallic dust, and the sharp, comforting aroma of strong coffee left to simmer on a small electric hot plate. It is a room of creation, cluttered with heavy iron vices, wooden workbenches, and scattered hand tools that have been worn smooth by years of use. In the center of this quiet sanctuary stands John. The cardigan he wears is now dusted with fine, golden powder. He is not standing at a chalkboard tonight. His delicate drawings of interlocking circles, those graceful, flower-like designs, have been brought down from the realm of thought and pinned to the wooden board in front of him. Now, it is time to bring them into the physical world. In John's hands is a solid cylinder of pure copper. It is heavy, cold, and entirely unremarkable to the untrained eye. But to John, it is the raw material of a miracle. He secures the copper block into the jaws of a heavy metal lathe. The workshop is silent, save for the soft, rhythmic patter of the rain against the frosted glass. John takes a deep breath, his tired eyes focused with absolute, unwavering intent. He flicks a switch, and the machine comes to life with a low, steady hum that vibrates through the floorboards. He begins to carve. He turns the wheel of the lathe with incredible gentleness, pressing a hardened steel bit against the spinning copper. A high, soft singing sound fills the room as the metal yields to his touch. Thin, beautiful ribbons of copper peel away from the block, catching the amber light of the single overhead bulb before falling to the floor like a shower of golden snow. It is a hypnotic, deeply intimate process. John is not a heavy-handed mechanic. He is working with the delicate precision of a watchmaker. He knows that the hollow chambers he is carving into this metal must be absolutely perfect. If they are too wide, the invisible waves will not sing. If they are too narrow, the energy will choke. Everything must be exact. Everything must be beautifully, perfectly balanced. He pauses to wipe his brow with a cloth. His back aches from leaning over the machine, and his fingers are cramped and stiff. The hour is impossibly late, and a heavy, familiar weariness tugs at his eyelids. It would be so easy to turn off the machine, to wrap his scarf around his neck, and walk home to his warm bed. But then, his mind drifts away from the spinning copper. He thinks of a moment from just a few days ago, a quiet encounter on the landing of his boarding house. He had been walking up the stairs when he saw his landlady, a kind, elderly woman named Mrs. Higgins, who always left a fresh apple on his desk. She was standing by the window, holding a small, yellow piece of paper in her trembling hands. It was a telegram. She had not been crying out loud, but the silent, devastating grief etched into the lines of her face had stopped John in his tracks. Her youngest boy, a lad who used to help John carry his heavy books, was not coming home from the coastal skies. John had stood there, his heart breaking for her, feeling entirely useless. He had no words of comfort that could mend a shattered world. So, he brings his focus back to the workshop. He cannot unwrite the telegram Mrs. Higgins received, but he can pour every ounce of his soul, every aching muscle, and every brilliant spark of his mind into making sure that fewer mothers have to stand weeping by their windows. This heavy block of copper is his answer to the dark. It is his way of fighting back, not with bullets, but with light. He turns the wheel again. The soft, singing sound of the metal resumes. He is not entirely alone in his midnight vigil. Curled up in a battered, velvet armchair in the corner of the workshop is a young university assistant named Thomas. The boy is fast asleep, a thick textbook resting open on his chest, rising and falling with his slow, steady breaths. Thomas had insisted on staying up to help, eager to be a part of the work, but the exhausting hours had finally claimed him. John looks over at the sleeping boy, a soft smile touching his lips. He stops the lathe, wipes his hands on a rag, and walks quietly over to the corner. He picks up his own heavy tweed coat from a peg on the wall and drapes it gently over the boy's shoulders, tucking it in to keep the draft away. It is a small, tender gesture. In the midst of this terrible global storm, in a room dedicated to building a machine of war, the quiet, everyday kindnesses of humanity still beautifully endure. John returns to his bench. The work is slow. It requires an immense, agonizing patience. He must bore 6 perfectly even chambers around a central core, turning the solid copper into a metallic labyrinth. It is a lonely, obsessive pursuit. The rest of the country is asleep under blackout curtains, entirely unaware that their salvation is being slowly, carefully sculpted from a block of plumbing metal by a rumpled, exhausted man in the dead of night. To uncover these stories, to piece together the quiet, sleepless nights, the scattered notes, and the personal sacrifices of those who changed history in the shadows, takes an immense amount of time and dedicated research. It is a solitary endeavor, much like sitting in a quiet workshop, sifting through the dust of the past to find the golden moments of truth. If you value these deep, human stories and wish to support the time it takes to bring them to life, I have a small tip jar on Ko-Fi. Even the price of a coffee helps keep the lights on and allows me to continue sharing these soothing journeys into history with you. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Every gesture of support is a reminder that keeping history alive is a beautiful, shared journey. The hands of the clock on the wall slowly creep past 3, then 4 in the morning. The rhythm of the workshop settles into a hypnotic trance. The hum of the motor. The gentle hiss of the cutting tool. The soft, golden shavings falling to the floor. Finally, the machine spins down. The sudden silence in the room is heavy and profound. The only sound left is the quiet breathing of the sleeping boy in the corner. John reaches into the lathe and unclamps his work. He holds the finished prototype in his hands. It is no larger than a saucer, but it feels immensely heavy. It is still warm from the friction of the blade, radiating a gentle heat into his calloused palms. He brushes away the last few flakes of dust. The intricate chambers he has carved catch the amber light, gleaming softly in the dim room. It does not look dangerous. It looks, quite simply, like a heavy piece of mechanical art. He traces the edge of the metal with his thumb. To anyone else, it is just a modified block of copper. But John sees the elegant equation made real. He sees the invisible waves swirling through those hollow chambers, building up speed, building up power, until they sing with a frequency so sharp and bright that no rain, no fog, and no darkness can hide from it. He sets the warm metal down on his desk, right next to the cold cup of coffee. He leans heavily against the wooden bench, closing his eyes, letting out a long, trembling breath that seems to carry all the tension of the past few weeks with it. Outside the frosted window, the deep black of the night sky is just beginning to soften. The storm clouds are parting, and a thin, delicate band of pale blue light is rising over the horizon. The dawn is coming. John does not know yet if his beautiful, copper labyrinth will actually work when plugged into the immense power of the military's machines. He does not know if it will shatter like all the glass tubes before it. But as he stands there in the quiet workshop, watching the first light of morning touch the golden shavings on the floor, he feels a profound sense of peace. He has done everything he can. The mind has spoken, the hands have built, and the magic is no longer just a drawing on a page. The answer to the mist is sitting right there on his desk, waiting to be awakened. For now, the world can sleep just a few moments longer, safe in the knowledge that someone, somewhere, kept the light burning through the night. It is a heavy thing to hold the dawn in your hands, knowing the night is still waiting at the door. The morning after the copper block was carved, the university town woke up exactly as it always did. The baker unlocked his front door, wiping flour from his apron. The milkman rattled his glass bottles along the damp, cobblestone streets. The world outside the frosted window of the workshop was beautifully, fiercely ordinary. But inside the quiet room, nothing would ever be the same. John stood before his wooden workbench, the pale, gray light of the early morning washing over his tired shoulders. He had not slept. His eyes were rimmed with red, and his hand still carried the faint, metallic scent of the lathe. Before him, resting gently on a clean, white cloth, was the finished prototype. It was a beautiful, intricate labyrinth carved into solid metal, glowing with a soft, warm hue in the morning light. He reached out and traced the edge of the cool copper with his thumb. It was so small. It could easily fit into the palm of his hand. Yet, as he looked at it, he felt a profound, invisible gravity pulling at his chest. Very carefully, John wrapped the copper block in the soft white cloth, folding the corners over with the delicate reverence of someone wrapping a fragile glass ornament. He placed it gently into the bottom of his worn, brown leather satchel, buckling the strap tight. He put on his heavy tweed coat, wrapped a thick wool scarf around his neck, and walked out into the damp, morning air. The journey from the quiet safety of the university to the hidden, anxious heart of the military's testing facilities was a long one. John found himself sitting on a rattling, steam-powered train, watching the rolling green hills of the countryside blur past the condensation on the window. The carriage was full, but it was incredibly quiet. It was the heavy, shared silence of a nation holding its breath. Across from John sat a young mother, a sleeping infant bundled tightly in a thick knitted blanket against her chest. Her face was pale, and dark shadows rested beneath her eyes. She stared out the window, lost in a distant, worrying thought, unconsciously rocking back and forth to the rhythmic clack-clack, clack-clack of the train wheels. 2 seats down, an older man in a faded flat cap was reading a newspaper, his brow furrowed, his hands gripping the thin paper so tightly his knuckles were white. John looked at these beautiful, fragile people. He looked at the gentle rise and fall of the baby's chest. And then, he looked down at the worn leather satchel resting on his lap. He placed his hands over the leather, feeling the hard, heavy lump of the copper block beneath the fabric. This was not just a piece of engineering anymore. The moment he walked out of his workshop, the metal had ceased to be an academic puzzle. It had become a vessel. Inside that small, heavy block rested the desperate hopes of the commanders pacing in their underground bunkers. Inside it rested the prayers of the girls sitting in the cold wooden huts on the cliffs, begging their screens to clear. Inside it rested the lives of thousands of boys like Arthur and Thomas, shivering in the freezing clouds, waiting for someone to give them back their eyes. The weight of it was suddenly terrifying. What if he was wrong? What if his beautiful, elegant equation only worked on the chalkboard? The military engineers had tried sending immense power through glass, and the glass had shattered. What if the raw, terrifying electricity they needed to pierce the mist simply melted his copper labyrinth into a useless lump of slag? A cold spike of anxiety drove itself deep into John's chest. He closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the rattling wooden seat. He could almost feel the phantom weight of the sky pressing down on his own shoulders. He felt the crushing, unimaginable pressure of a nation's survival resting entirely on a tiny idea born in the dead of night. When the train finally hissed to a halt at a gray, nondescript station, the military world was there to swallow him whole. There were no grand parades or welcoming committees. There was only a dark green motorcar waiting in the rain, idling quietly. Two men in stiff, woolen uniforms stepped out. Their faces were drawn and tight, completely devoid of the soft, academic curiosity John was so used to. They opened the door for him without a word. They drove him deep into the countryside, away from the quiet villages and the rolling farms, until they reached a high, imposing fence of barbed wire. Behind the wire sat a series of low, gray concrete buildings, half buried in the earth, hiding from the sky. When John stepped out of the car, the air smelled entirely different. It was sharp with the scent of ozone, damp concrete, and the bitter tang of unfiltered cigarettes. He clutched his leather satchel tightly against his chest, looking entirely out of place in his rumpled cardigan and scuffed shoes amidst the sea of pressed olive drab. He was led down a long, echoing corridor beneath the earth, the fluorescent lights above buzzing with a low, nervous energy. They brought him to a stark, windowless room, where an older man was waiting over a map table. It was Edward, the weary commander from the underground bunkers in London. Edward looked up as John entered. The general's eyes were incredibly hollow, the skin around them bruised with exhaustion. He looked at the rumpled academic, and then his gaze fell to the leather satchel in John's hands. "Is that it?" Edward asked, his voice barely more than a raspy whisper. John nodded slowly. He walked over to the wooden table, unbuckled the straps of the bag, and gently lifted out the cloth-wrapped bundle. He pulled back the white fabric, revealing the gleaming, intricate copper block. Under the harsh, unnatural light of the bunker, it looked impossibly small. Edward stared at it for a long, quiet moment. He did not ask how it worked. He did not ask for the mathematical equations or the theories of resonance. He simply looked at the metal with a desperate, heartbreaking vulnerability. "The boys are flying blind today, John," Edward said softly, his voice trembling just a fraction. "The fog on the coast is thicker than it has been in weeks. We are losing them in the gray." The general looked up, his eyes meeting John's. "Will this sing in the dark? Will it clear the glass?" "I believe it will," John whispered, though his own heart was hammering wildly against his ribs. "It has to." Edward nodded, a slow, heavy movement. He turned to the engineers waiting by the door. "Prepare the testing bay. We wire it to the main generators in 1 hour." That hour was the longest of John's life. He was placed in a small, quiet holding room to wait while the military technicians prepared the massive power banks. There was nothing in the room but a narrow iron cot, a single wooden chair, and a ticking clock on the wall that seemed to stretch every second into an eternity. John sat on the edge of the cot, resting his face in his hands. The anxiety was a physical ache in his stomach. He felt utterly alone, completely isolated from the world he knew. A soft knock on the door broke the silence. A young orderly stepped into the room, holding a tin tray with a steaming mug of tea and a single slice of dry toast. The boy had kind eyes, and his uniform jacket was slightly too big for his narrow shoulders. "For you, sir," the boy said softly, placing the tray on the chair next to the cot. As the boy leaned over, the lapel of his jacket fell open just a fraction. Pinned to the inside lining, close to his heart, was a small, creased black and white photograph. It was a picture of two young men, arms thrown around each other, laughing brightly in the summer sun. One of them was the orderly. The other, wearing the thick leather jacket of a pilot, had the beautiful, haunting look of someone who had already slipped away into the mist. John looked at the photograph, and then up at the boy. The orderly caught his gaze, gently touching the outside of his coat over the picture, a silent, protective gesture. He offered John a small, incredibly sad smile, and then quietly left the room, closing the door softly behind him. John stared at the closed door, the hot tears finally pricking at the corners of his eyes. Every single person in this building, every person on that train, every person huddled by their radios at home, was carrying a ghost. They were all carrying a profound, hidden sorrow. When we hold these physical connections to the past, a worn photograph tucked inside a coat, a handwritten letter, or a heavy piece of carved copper, we are holding the very soul of history. These tangible artifacts anchor us to the immense sacrifices made by ordinary people facing terrifying odds. For those of you who find deep meaning in preserving these connections, and who wish to understand the vast, harrowing reality of this global struggle, collecting thoughtful memorabilia or immersing yourself in beautifully crafted historical cinema can be a profound way to honor their memory. I highly recommend exploring Amazon for authentic historical keepsakes, or watching the deeply moving film Midway on Prime, which captures the terrifying isolation and bravery of fighting in the vast, open spaces of the war. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Bringing these artifacts and stories into your home is a beautiful way to ensure the weight they carried is never forgotten. John left the tea untouched. He stood up and began to pace the small room, his shoes scuffing softly against the cold concrete floor. He tried to retreat into his mind, back to the safe, quiet world of numbers and equations. He mentally traced the circles he had drawn on the paper. He thought of the spinning lathe, the singing metal, the golden shavings falling to the floor. The math was perfect. The logic was sound. But metal and electricity are wild things. When you force the raw, violent energy of a lightning storm into a tiny, delicate labyrinth, logic often bows to chaos. The heavy steel door of the waiting room finally clicked open. Edward stood in the hallway, his face an unreadable mask. "It is time, John," he said quietly. John smoothed down the front of his rumpled cardigan, took a deep, steadying breath, and followed the commander down the echoing corridor. They arrived at the testing bay. It was a massive, cavernous room that felt more like a cathedral of industry than a laboratory. The walls were lined with thick, heavy cables snaking across the floor like black veins. In the center of the room sat a massive, terrifyingly large bank of electrical generators, humming with a deep, bone-rattling vibration that John could feel in the soles of his feet. And there, mounted entirely alone on a heavily reinforced testing stand in the middle of the room, was his beautiful little copper block. It had been wired into the heart of the beast. A dozen engineers stood behind a thick wall of protective glass, their faces pale and sweating in the dim light. They knew what usually happened when they turned these dials. They were expecting the blinding flash of melting metal, the terrifying crack of shattered components, the heavy smell of burning failure. Edward stepped up to the thick glass window, looking out at the tiny copper labyrinth. He turned to John, who had stepped up quietly beside him. "We are going to push more power through that little piece of metal than we have ever attempted before," the chief engineer said, his hand resting nervously on a large, heavy iron lever. "If there is a flaw, it will not just break. It will vaporize." John looked through the glass. He felt incredibly small, incredibly tired, and yet completely at peace. He had given them the best of his mind. He had given them his midnight hours. He had carved a whisper of hope out of the dark. "Turn it on," John whispered, his voice incredibly soft, but entirely steady. The engineer nodded. He gripped the heavy iron lever, took a breath, and prepared to throw the switch, sending the raw, terrifying power of a desperate nation straight into the heart of the elegant equation. There is a fragile, breathtaking silence that exists in the fraction of a second before the world changes forever. In the cavernous, concrete testing bay, the air is so thick with anticipation that it feels difficult to breathe. Behind the heavy, protective glass window, John stands beside the weary commander, Edward. Neither man speaks. They are watching the engineer's hand, white-knuckled and trembling slightly, gripping the cold iron lever that controls the massive electrical generators. In the center of the room, looking impossibly small and lonely on its reinforced stand, sits John's copper block. It is just a piece of metal. A beautiful, hand-carved labyrinth, yes, but still just metal. And they are about to force a terrifying, unnatural storm of energy right into its delicate heart. Every previous attempt, every glass tube and traditional valve, had met this same wall of power and violently surrendered. They had shattered, melted, and burned, unable to hold the sheer, concentrated force required to punch a hole through the thickest coastal fog. The engineer looks at Edward. Edward gives a slow, barely perceptible nod. The lever is thrown. There is no dramatic explosion. There is no booming thunderclap. Instead, there is a deep, bone-rattling thrum that starts in the concrete floor and travels all the way up through John's worn leather shoes, vibrating in his very chest. The heavy black cables snaking across the floor suddenly jerk and stiffen, surging with an invisible, terrifying river of electricity. Behind the glass, the men instinctively flinch. They brace themselves for the blinding flash, for the sickening crack of failure, for the acrid smell of vaporized copper. 1 second passes. Then 2. Then 3. John slowly opens his tightly clenched eyes. The copper block is still there. It has not shattered. It has not melted into a useless, fiery puddle. Instead, a completely new sound begins to fill the cavernous room. It starts as a low, resonant hum, building up from beneath the roar of the generators. It grows clearer, higher, and purer with every passing moment. It is a beautiful, metallic singing. The raw, violent electricity is rushing into the tiny, hollow chambers John had carved by hand in the dead of night. And instead of breaking the metal, the energy is swirling inside those chambers, chasing itself round and round, building a perfect, harmonic resonance. The engineer at the control panel stares at his dials in absolute disbelief. The needles are pushed far into the red, registering an output of power that defies everything they thought they knew about physics. They are producing the exact, sharp, incredibly short waves of energy needed to see through the rain. And the copper block is holding it beautifully. It is singing in the dark. John steps closer to the glass, so close that the tip of his nose almost touches the cold pane. His breath fogs the surface. He looks at the tiny block of metal, and a single, silent tear spills over his lower lash line, tracking warmly down his cheek, losing itself in the collar of his rumpled cardigan. It is a tear born of pure, exhausting relief. He does not cheer. He does not raise his hands in victory. He simply leans his forehead against the glass and lets out a long, trembling breath that seems to carry weeks of sleepless nights and quiet terrors away with it. Beside him, Edward stands completely frozen. The general, a man who has spent his life ordering men into the fire, a man who has carried the crushing weight of 1,000 lost souls on his shoulders, is weeping. He makes no sound, but the tears flow freely down his deeply lined face. He presses his hand against the glass, almost reaching out to touch the beautiful, singing metal. "My God," Edward whispers, his voice cracking into a raw, fragile rasp. "You have given them eyes." To fully understand the gravity of this single moment, we must pause and think of the terrible, crushing dark that existed outside this room. While this copper block sang its beautiful note, hundreds of miles away on the coast, the thick gray fog was still clinging to the cliffs. Young men were sitting in their damp wooden barracks, wrapping themselves in blankets, writing letters they hoped would never have to be sent. The raw, freezing, terrifying reality of the war was grinding on. The true, unfiltered reality of what those young men and women faced in the shadows is something that the polished history books so rarely show. We often only see the sanitized victories, the grand speeches, the clean maps. But there was an uncensored, heartbreaking grit to their daily lives, the absolute terror of the blind flights, the exhaustion of the radar operators, the brutal reality of the world they were trying to save. If you are someone who feels a deep calling to witness this unvarnished history, to look past the gentle stories and understand the stark, true reality of those days, I have curated something for you. On Gumroad, I have put together a collection of unseen media, raw photographs, restricted film segments, and uncensored accounts of the war that are simply too intense and too real to share on this platform. It is a solemn, deeply moving window into the true cost of those years. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a heavy journey, but for those who wish to honor the complete truth of their sacrifice, it is a necessary one. Back in the testing bay, the minutes stretch on. The engineers let the power flow, waiting for the inevitable moment when the heat will finally overcome the copper. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 15. The singing never falters. The pitch remains absolutely, perfectly steady. The beautiful equation holds firm against the chaos. Finally, Edward places a gentle hand on the engineer's shoulder. "That is enough," he murmurs. "Power it down." The engineer pulls the heavy iron lever back. The deep thrum of the generators begins to wind down, a slow, fading sigh. The stiff black cables relax. The singing of the copper softens, dropping lower and lower until it fades back into silence. The sudden quiet in the room is holy. It is the hushed reverence of a cathedral after the final chord of a hymn has faded into the stone. An engineer steps forward and unlatches the heavy steel door leading into the testing bay. As the door swings open, a wave of heat washes over them, carrying the sharp, metallic scent of hot copper and ozone. John walks slowly into the room. He approaches the testing stand with the careful, measured steps of a man approaching a wild animal. The block of metal is radiating an immense heat, shimmering slightly in the dim air. The beautiful, golden surface has been tempered by the violent energy, taking on a faint, iridescent bruised purple and blue hue along its edges. It is no longer just a piece of plumbing metal from a quiet university workshop. It has been forged in the fire. It is the heart of a new, impossible machine. John reaches into his pocket and pulls out the soft white cloth he had used to carry it. He doesn't touch the blistering metal, but he stands over it, feeling its warmth against his face. Edward steps up beside him. The general looks down at the tiny, discolored block, and then looks at John. The exhaustion is still there in the older man's eyes, but the hollow, defeated despair has vanished. In its place is a quiet, fierce spark. "Can you make more?" Edward asks, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. "Can you make enough to fill the sky?" John looks at the bruised, beautiful metal, thinking of the spinning lathe, the falling golden shavings, the sleeping boy in his workshop. He thinks of the sheer, staggering impossibility of what they have just done. "Yes," John says simply. "We can make them." There is no cheering. There is no popping of champagne corks. There is only a quiet, profound understanding that the impossible lock has finally been picked. The fatal flaw of the great iron towers has been solved, not by an army, but by a quiet, rumpled man who listened to the shape of the mist and decided to make it sing. The spark has been lit in the dark. It is only one small light, burning in a windowless room deep beneath the earth. But it is enough. The long, terrifying night is finally beginning to crack, and for the first time in what feels like an eternity, the men in the shadows allow themselves to truly believe that the dawn is coming. There is a profound, quiet beauty in holding the answer to a prayer in the palm of your hand. The journey back to the sleepy university town is completely different from the terrible, anxious ride of the morning. John sits in the corner of the wooden train carriage, resting his head against the cool, rattling glass of the window. Outside, the afternoon sun is beginning to sink low over the rolling green hills, casting long, gentle shadows across the fields. The world is exactly the same as it was a few hours ago, yet, to the exhausted man in the rumpled cardigan, everything has changed. The heavy leather satchel rests on his lap once more. But it no longer feels like an impossible burden. The phantom weight that had pressed so heavily against his chest has lifted, replaced by a deep, soaring lightness. Inside the bag, wrapped gently in its white cloth, the small block of copper is completely silent. It is cooled from the violent heat of the testing bay, but if you were to lean very close, you might still catch the faintest, lingering scent of ozone and warm metal. John closes his eyes and lets the rhythmic, soothing clack-clack, clack-clack of the train wheels wash over him. He thinks of the sheer, breathtaking elegance of what has just happened. In the grand, sweeping narratives of the world, we are so often taught that massive, terrifying problems require massive, terrifying solutions. The generals had tried to fight the dark with brute force, throwing immense power at the sky, trying to build towering machines of glass and steel that only shattered under the strain. But the truth of the universe is often much gentler. The universe favors the elegant equation. This little block of metal did not fight the electricity. It welcomed it. It gave the chaotic energy a beautiful, carved path to follow, swirling it around until it found its own natural harmony, its own perfect song. It is a stunning realization. The device that will save thousands of lives, the machine that will pierce the thickest fog and spot the shadows in the dark, does not cost a fortune. It does not require vast factories or thousands of men to operate. It is simply a piece of copper, a little bit of mathematics, and a quiet, unbound mind. As the train slowly pulls into the small, familiar station, the evening mist is just beginning to settle over the cobblestones. John walks the quiet streets toward his boarding house, his footsteps falling softly in the damp air. He passes the baker, sweeping the last of the day's flour from his step. He passes a young couple walking arm in arm beneath the dim glow of a street lamp. They do not know who he is. They do not know what he carries in his worn leather bag. And John feels a profound, protective warmth toward them. He is carrying their tomorrow. When he reaches the boarding house, he climbs the creaking wooden stairs with a slow, heavy exhaustion that feels incredibly sweet. He pauses on the landing, looking at the closed door of his landlady, Mrs. Higgins. He thinks of the yellow telegram she had held in her trembling hands just days ago. He cannot knock on her door. He cannot tell her the military secrets hidden in his satchel, or explain the complex frequencies of invisible waves. But he rests his hand gently against the wood of her doorframe for just a moment, a silent, deeply personal vow. He has built a lantern for the lost boys. He has done it for her. The true weight of this history is rarely found in the loud, triumphant headlines or the polished speeches of politicians. It is found right here, on a quiet staircase, in the unsent letters, and in the unspoken bonds of ordinary people holding each other up in the dark. It is a deeply layered, intensely human story, and there is so much more to it than can ever be told in a single sitting. If you feel a kinship with these hidden spaces of the past, and you find comfort in exploring the unvarnished, uncensored depths of history with a community of kindred spirits, I would love to invite you to join our Patreon. There, we share exclusive, deep-dive podcasts, entirely unfiltered historical accounts, and a quiet space to reflect together. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Finding a trusted space to remember these gentle, hidden truths is a beautiful way to honor the quiet resilience of the past. The next morning, the sun breaks through the mist, washing the university in a pale, golden light. John does not return to the grand lecture halls. He walks straight to the quiet alleyway behind the physics department, unlocking the door to the dusty, oil-scented workshop. But today, he is not alone. Edward, the weary commander from the underground bunkers, had been true to his word. If they were to fill the sky with this miracle, they needed more than one tired man and a single spinning lathe. Sitting patiently on the wooden stools around the workshop are four older men. They wear thick, canvas aprons over heavy woolen trousers. They are machinists, watchmakers, and retired engineers from the surrounding villages. Men with silver hair and deeply lined faces, whose hands are too old to hold a rifle, but whose fingers still possess the steady, beautiful precision of a lifetime of quiet craftsmanship. John stands before them. He does not give a stirring, military speech. He simply walks over to his chalkboard, picks up a piece of white chalk, and begins to draw. He draws the elegant equation. He sketches the graceful circles, the delicate hollows, the perfectly balanced dimensions of the copper labyrinth. The older men lean forward, their eyes narrowing as they follow the lines. They are men who speak the language of metal and mechanics, and as the drawing takes shape, a quiet murmur of appreciation ripples through the room. They recognize the sheer, simple beauty of the design. They understand the poetry of the machine. John opens his satchel and places the original, bruised copper block gently onto the wooden workbench. The men gather around it, tracing the beautifully carved chambers, running their calloused thumbs over the iridescent, heat-tempered edges. "We need 100 of these by the end of the month," John says softly. "Can we do it?" An old machinist with thick spectacles and a gentle, withered smile looks up from the metal. He reaches out and gently pats John on the shoulder. "We will make them sing, lad," he whispers. "Every last one of them." And so, a new rhythm takes over the small, drafty workshop. It is no longer the lonely, desperate vigil of a single man in the dead of night. It becomes a quiet, shared symphony. For heavy metal lathes spin to life, their motors humming a low, steady harmony. The sharp, sweet scent of cutting oil fills the room. If you were to stand outside that frosted window now, you would not hear the terrifying sounds of a world at war. You would hear the gentle, soothing hiss of hardened steel carving into soft copper. You would see the amber light catching a constant, beautiful shower of golden ribbons falling to the floorboards. These men do not talk much as they work. They pour their silent prayers, their private fears, and their quiet hopes into every single block of metal they shape. They think of their grandsons, their nephews, the boys from their villages who are out there in the freezing clouds. Every perfectly carved chamber is a lifeline cast into the void. Day after day, the wooden crates in the corner of the workshop begin to fill. They are packed with soft straw, and nestled safely inside are rows upon rows of the gleaming copper labyrinths. Each one is identical. Each one is a tiny, perfectly realized masterpiece of the elegant equation. Far away from this quiet room, the heavy wheels of the military are beginning to turn in anticipation. On the damp, grassy airfields, the mechanics are quietly modifying the noses of the airplanes, making room for the new, secret eyes they have been promised. In the towering masts on the chalk cliffs, the girls are staring at their static-filled screens, entirely unaware that a curer is already packed in wooden crates, traveling toward them on the night trains. The desperate search is over. The heavy, suffocating despair that had gripped the underground bunkers has given way to a breathless, quiet hope. John stands in the doorway of his workshop late one evening, sipping from a tin cup of tea, watching the old men carefully pack the last crate of the week. The rain has started again, a soft, misty drizzle that blurs the streetlights into glowing halos. He looks out into the gray, but he no longer feels the cold dread in his stomach. He knows that very soon, the mist will no longer be a place to hide. The shadows are about to lose their cover. The elegant equation is leaving the safety of the quiet, dusty workshop, and it is going out to meet the dark. Let us rest here for a moment, listening to the gentle rain, safe in the warm glow of the workshop, before we follow those wooden crates to the edge of the sky. It is a strangely difficult thing to convince a frightened man to trust a miracle he can hold in one hand. Under the cover of a moonless night, a quiet, rumbling procession of olive green canvas trucks makes its way along the winding, muddy roads of the coastline. The rain is falling in a soft, relentless drizzle, turning the world outside the headlamp beams into a shifting canvas of gray and black. Inside the trucks, resting on the wooden floorboards, are the small, straw-filled crates that have journeyed from the dusty, oil-scented workshop in the university town. They are carrying the dawn, packaged in white cloth and copper. But to the men waiting at the windswept airfields, the dawn feels very far away. Let us step out of the rain and into one of the massive, cavernous hangars at the edge of the airfield. The air inside is freezing, smelling sharply of high-octane fuel, wet canvas, and cold iron. The wind howls around the corrugated tin roof, finding every crack and crevice, rattling the metal like a nervous heartbeat. Standing beneath the broad, dark wing of a sleeping airplane is an older officer. We will call him Colonel Harris. Harris is a man carved from the rigid, unyielding traditions of the old world. His uniform is pressed perfectly, his posture is impossibly straight, and his face is deeply lined with the terrible arithmetic of war. He is used to solving problems with sheer, overwhelming force. In his mind, a threat as vast and terrifying as the blind, coastal fog requires a solution of equal, towering magnitude. He wants armor. He wants massive, roaring engines. He wants great iron shields reaching up to the heavens. A young corporal pries open one of the newly arrived wooden crates with a quiet crack of splintering pine. He reaches into the soft, yellow straw and gently pulls out the bundle of white cloth. He unwraps it and steps back, offering the contents to the colonel. Harris looks down. Resting in the corporal's grease-stained hands is the copper block. It is no larger than a teacup. The hangar is silent save for the drumming of the rain. Harris does not reach out to touch it. He simply stares at it, a deep, heavy furrow appearing on his brow. The look in his eyes is not one of awe or relief. It is a look of profound, heartbreaking disappointment. "We are losing boys to the fog every single day," the colonel whispers, his voice thick with a weary, quiet anger. "The sky is full of ghosts. And London has sent us a paperweight. This is the hidden, agonizing battle that is rarely spoken of in the grand histories. It is the battle against doubt. When a group of people has been battered by failure, when they have watched their towering iron masts turn blind in the mist, hoping again becomes an incredibly dangerous thing. To put your faith in something new is to risk having your heart broken all over again." And looking at this tiny, beautifully carved piece of plumbing metal, the military men feel entirely bereft. It simply does not look like salvation. Let us move away from the colonel, into the deeper shadows of the hangar, to a young mechanic named Peter. Peter is barely 22, but his hands are permanently stained with engine grease, and his knuckles are scarred from slipping wrenches. He loves the airplanes he tends to. He talks to them in the dark, patting their cold metal fuselages, coaxing their engines to life with the gentle patience of a hoarse whisperer. He feels a crushing, personal responsibility for the pilots who fly them. Peter has been ordered to install these new copper blocks into the noses of his beloved airplanes. He sits on an overturned wooden crate, turning the heavy little labyrinth over in his hands. He traces the delicate hollows, feeling the smooth, iridescent edge where the metal was forged in the testing bay's fire. He feels a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He knows the boys who sleep in the damp wooden barracks. He knows how young they are, and how tightly they hold their letters from home before they climb into the freezing cockpits. If he wires this little toy into the heart of the airplane, and it fails them in the dark, he feels as though the blood will be on his own grease-stained hands. Peter reaches into the pocket of his overalls and pulls out a small, crumpled piece of paper and a stub of a pencil. He rests the paper on his knee, shielding it from the draft, and begins to write a letter to his father, an old clockmaker who taught him how to listen to the delicate heartbeat of machines. "Dad," Peter writes, his handwriting small and cramped from the cold. "They have sent us something new today. They tell us it will clear the mist. But it is so impossibly small, Dad. It looks like a gear pulled from one of your pocket watches, not a shield for a warplane. I am afraid to wire it in. I am afraid to tell the boys that it will keep them safe. It is so hard to believe in miracles when everything else has been washed away by the rain. I just want to keep them safe, but I do not know how to trust this. He folds the little note and tucks it back into his pocket, close to his heart. He is carrying the heavy, suffocating weight of a deeply rooted doubt, a quiet terror that the brilliant minds in London have simply lost their grip on reality. So much of the history we are taught focuses on the grand battles fought high in the sky or out on the vast, churning oceans. But some of the most profound, world-altering struggles were fought right here, in quiet, drafty hangars, against the rigid thinking of bureaucracy. And the deeply human fear of hoping again. It is in these unseen, emotional trenches that the true shape of the world is decided. I find these forgotten, internal battles to be the most compelling parts of our past. If you find yourself drawn to these hidden stories of secret struggles, I would love to invite you to join my weekly email newsletter. Each week, we explore these quiet corners of history together. And as a gentle welcome, I will send you a free copy of my ebook, The Shadow War: 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a wonderful, safe way to keep these profound human stories alive and close to your heart. As Peter sits quietly with his doubts, the heavy side door of the hangar creaks open, letting in a swirl of damp night air. A figure steps out of the rain and into the dim, amber light. It is John, the rumpled, quiet engineer. He does not wear a uniform. His thick tweed coat is speckled with raindrops, and his scarf is wound loosely around his neck. He looks entirely out of place in this fortress of iron and canvas. But he has not come to shout orders. He has not come to argue with the rigid colonel. He has come because he knows that an elegant equation is nothing without the hands that must build it into the world. John walks slowly through the hangar, his shoes making hardly a sound on the concrete. He finds Peter sitting under the wing, staring down at the copper block in his hands. John does not pull rank. He simply turns over an empty fuel tin and sits down next to the young mechanic. For a long time, they just sit in the quiet, shared companionship of two men who understand the heavy burden of the dark. It feels too small, doesn't it? John says softly, his voice barely a whisper above the sound of the rain on the roof. Peter looks up, startled, then looks back down at his grease-stained hands. He nods slowly. They have given us mountains of steel before, sir. And those failed. How can this tiny thing do what the mountains could not? John smiles, a gentle, understanding warmth reaching his tired eyes. He reaches into his own pocket and pulls out a small, hollow brass whistle. He holds it up in the dim light. Do you know why the great iron masts failed, Peter? John asks, his tone as soothing as a late-night lullaby. They failed because they were trying to shout at the storm. They were trying to be louder than the ocean, louder than the rain. But the storm is always louder. John brings the little brass whistle to his lips and blows a soft, clear, piercing note that cuts right through the howling wind outside, ringing beautifully in the echoing hangar. This, John says, pointing gently to the copper block in Peter's hands, does not shout. We carved those little chambers so that the energy would swirl inside them, chasing itself, building a perfect, harmonic resonance. It sings, Peter. It sings a note so sharp and so pure that the fog simply cannot hold it. It slips right through the rain, touches the shadows, and brings the echo right back to us. Peter looks at the metal in his hands with new eyes. I did not build this alone, John continues quietly. It was carved by old men. Grandfathers. Watchmakers and retired machinists in a dusty room miles from here. They poured their love, and their worry, and their quiet prayers into every single edge of that metal. They made it for you. They made it for the boys sleeping in the barracks. The heavy, paralyzing ice of doubt in Peter's chest finally begins to thaw. He realizes that he is not holding a cold, unfeeling piece of military hardware. He is holding a piece of handcrafted care. He is holding a physical manifestation of a nation's quiet, desperate love for its children. He runs his thumb over the intricate hollows one more time. The metal feels different now. It feels warm. I understand, Peter whispers, his voice thick with a sudden, gentle emotion. John nods, pats the young mechanic softly on the shoulder, and stands up. He walks back out into the rain, leaving Peter alone in the dim light. Peter does not hesitate anymore. He stands up, wipes his hands carefully on a clean rag, and climbs up the metal ladder to the nose of the waiting airplane. He works with a new, reverent gentleness. He connects the heavy black wires to the beautiful copper labyrinth, securing it deep within the machinery of the aircraft. He treats it with the same delicate care his father used when placing the fragile balance wheel into a golden pocket watch. When he is finished, he closes the metal cowling and rests his hand against the cold skin of the airplane. The doubt in the ranks has not entirely vanished. The rigid colonels still pace in their offices, and the pilots still toss and turn in their sleep, dreaming of the gray void. But here, in this quiet hangar, the first seed of true belief has been planted. Peter climbs down the ladder, his heart beating with a strange, nervous anticipation. The planes are ready. The copper hearts are wired into the dark. All that is left now is to wait for the morning, to send the boys up into the blinding mist, and to pray that the quiet, rumpled man in the tweed coat was right. The hangar settles back into silence, the rain drumming its endless lullaby on the roof, as the world holds its breath, waiting to see if the metal will finally sing. There is a distinct, quiet kind of courage required to step into the sky when it offers you nothing but a wall of unbroken gray. The morning of the very first test flight arrives not with a glorious, golden sunrise, but with a thick, suffocating mist that rolls off the cold waters of the channel and swallows the airfield whole. It is the kind of damp, heavy fog that mutes every sound, turning the sprawling grassy fields into a small, isolated room of shifting white shadows. To a pilot, this weather is a nightmare. It is the exact weather that blinded their great iron towers and broke their hearts. But today, the mood on the damp grass is different. There is a hushed, fragile anticipation hanging in the freezing air. Arthur, the young pilot who had once written such hopeful letters to his sister, walks slowly toward his resting airplane. His heavy, fleece-lined boots crunch softly on the wet gravel. He wears his thick leather jacket, the collar turned up against the biting chill, and his hands are shoved deep into his pockets. His fingers are wrapped tightly around a smooth, worn wooden token, a small carving of a sparrow his grandfather had given him when he was a boy. He rubs his thumb over its curved wings, drawing comfort from the simple, grounded memory of home. He is frightened. It is a quiet, deeply personal fear that he hides behind a calm, steady expression. He has flown into the fog before, relying on the old, failing machines, and he knows the terrifying, disorienting sensation of losing the horizon. He knows how easily the sky can turn into a cage of clouds. Waiting for him beneath the broad, dripping wing of the aircraft is Peter, the young mechanic with the grease-stained hands. Peter has not slept. He has spent the entire night carefully, lovingly wiring the little copper labyrinth into the nose of Arthur's plane. As Arthur approaches, Peter steps forward. He does not offer a salute or a formal greeting. Instead, he reaches out and rests a hand gently on the cold metal cowling of the engine, right where the new device is hidden. "She is ready, Arthur," Peter whispers, his voice thick with a mixture of exhaustion and a desperate, beautiful hope. "I tucked it in safe. I treated it like glass. The men who carved it, they said it would sing for you." Arthur looks into Peter's tired eyes. He sees the dark circles, the smudged grease on his cheek, the unmistakable weight of care. In that brief, silent exchange, an entire universe of trust is passed between them. Arthur is placing his life in Peter's hands, and Peter is offering up the sum of all his meticulous, midnight labor. "Thank you, Peter," Arthur murmurs softly. "I will listen for it." Arthur climbs up the metal ladder and slips into the cramped, freezing cockpit. The smell of canvas, cold leather, and aviation fuel surrounds him like a familiar, heavy blanket. He fastens his harness, the straps pulling tight across his chest. He pulls on his leather helmet, snapping the chin strap beneath his jaw, and settles into the worn seat. Before him, nestled among the familiar, round faces of his altimeter and compass, is something entirely new. It is a small, circular glass screen, hooded by a piece of black rubber to block out the glare. It is dark now, quiet and unassuming. Outside, Peter steps back into the mist, offering a single, slow nod. Arthur starts the engine. The propeller churns the heavy air, sputtering at first, then catching with a deep, vibrating roar that shakes the frost from the wings. He taxis slowly out onto the invisible runway, guided only by the dim, yellow lights marking the grass. He takes a deep breath, drawing the cold air into his lungs, and pushes the throttle forward. The airplane surges ahead, eating up the damp grass, lifting gently from the earth. And within seconds, the ground completely vanishes. The transition is immediate and jarring. One moment, Arthur is tethered to the world, and the next, he is swallowed entirely by the void. The mist wraps around the canopy, a blinding, swirling white nothingness. The sound of the engine is muffled by the thick moisture. There is no up, no down, no east, no west. There is only the vibrating seat beneath him and the terrifying, infinite gray. This is the place where so many young men had found themselves lost. It is a place of profound, chilling isolation. Arthur's heart hammers against his ribs. The urge to panic, to pull back on the stick and try to climb above the clouds, is almost overwhelming. His hands grip the controls so tightly his knuckles ache. He forces himself to breathe. He thinks of his sister, safe in her warm bed. He thinks of Peter, standing in the cold grass, waiting. He thinks of the quiet, rumpled engineer in the tweed coat, who had promised him a lantern in the dark. "All right," Arthur whispers to the empty cockpit. "Let's see if you can sing." It takes an immense amount of care, patience, and resources to uncover these deeply intimate moments of the past. History is not just a collection of dates and battlefields, it is the feeling of a young man's trembling hand in a freezing cockpit, the smell of damp wool, the quiet prayers whispered into the dark. If you find peace and connection in these soft, human stories, and you would like to help support the countless hours of research it takes to keep this history alive, I have a small Ko-Fi tip jar. Even the smallest gesture helps me continue crafting these gentle bedtime stories for you. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Knowing that you are here, listening and caring for these forgotten souls, means the absolute world to me. Arthur reaches out with a gloved hand. His fingers brush against a small, newly installed toggle switch on the instrument panel. He flips it upward. Deep in the nose of the airplane, the electrical current rushes into the intricate, hand-carved chambers of the copper block. Just as it had in the concrete testing bay, the metal welcomes the power. It begins to resonate, building that perfect, sharp, invisible harmony, sending a beam of pure, focused energy slicing straight through the thick, wet fog. In the cockpit, the little circular glass screen flickers to life. It glows with a soft, warm, beautiful green light, casting a gentle, emerald hue across Arthur's tired face. He stares at the glass, holding his breath. Weeks ago, in the wooden huts on the cliffs, the operators had watched their screens dissolve into chaotic, snowy static whenever the rain fell. The long waves had bounced harmlessly off the mist, blinded by the weather. But this is different. The green light on Arthur's screen is not snow. It is a crisp, brilliant, perfectly clean sweep of light, rotating smoothly around the glass like the sweeping second hand of a grandfather clock. The singing copper is cutting through the clouds as if they were made of thin tissue paper. Arthur watches the sweep. Once. Twice. And then, it happens. Just at the edge of the screen, a small, bright, unmistakable shape pulses into view. It is solid. It is clear. It is not a ghost born of static, and it is not a trick of the light. Arthur's eyes widen. He banks the airplane gently, turning toward the invisible shape. As he flies closer, the glowing mark on the screen moves toward the center, growing larger, defining itself with breathtaking clarity. He can see the long, distinct outline of a heavy merchant ship sailing on the dark waters far, far below him. He cannot see the ship with his own eyes. Outside the cockpit glass, there is still nothing but the terrifying, blinding gray fog. But on the little green screen, the world is perfectly, beautifully illuminated. He can see the shape of the coastline miles away. He can see the empty space around him. The sky has been unlocked. A profound, overwhelming wave of relief washes over Arthur. It starts in his chest and radiates all the way out to his fingertips. The phantom weight of the sky, the heavy, suffocating dread that had haunted his every waking moment, suddenly shatters and falls away. He is no longer blind. He is no longer lost. The miracle works. Arthur leans back against his seat, and for the first time in what feels like an eternity, he smiles. It is a wide, genuine, tearful smile. He reaches out and gently taps the glass of the little green screen, just as Evelyn and William had tapped their failing monitors weeks ago. But this tap is not a desperate plea. It is a quiet, joyful thank you. He reaches for his radio microphone, pressing the button with a trembling thumb. Back on the airfield, in a small wooden hut smelling of hot coffee and damp coats, a group of officers and mechanics, including Peter, are huddled around a crackling speaker. They have been waiting in agonizing silence, staring at the floorboards, praying to whoever might be listening. The static on the radio breaks. "Base, this is Arthur," his voice comes through, crackling but impossibly warm, filled with an emotion that brings sudden tears to the eyes of the men listening. "I have it. I have the ship. The picture is clear. My God, the picture is beautifully clear." In the damp wooden hut, there is no loud cheering. There is only a collective, shuddering sigh. Men drop their heads into their hands. An older officer wipes his eyes with a handkerchief. Peter, the young mechanic, leans his back against the wooden wall, sliding slowly down until he is sitting on the floor, resting his forehead on his grease-stained knees, weeping quietly with sheer, absolute relief. Up in the clouds, Arthur continues to fly. He does not want to land just yet. He spends a few more minutes drifting through the misty void, watching the beautiful, rhythmic sweep of the green light. He feels incredibly safe. He feels as though a protective hand has finally been placed over him, wrapping him in a warm, watchful embrace. The elegant equation has been carried into the heavens, and it has answered the dark with light. The first flight of hope is drawing to a close, not with a fiery battle, but with a gentle, triumphant return. Arthur turns the nose of his airplane back toward the invisible shore, guided perfectly, flawlessly, by the soft green glow of the singing metal, following the invisible thread all the way back home. There is a sudden, breathtaking moment when a long, dark winter finally surrenders to the very first breath of spring. For the longest time, the men and women stationed along the damp, windswept edges of the coastline had been living in a perpetual, emotional winter. The fog had been their enemy, a freezing, suffocating blanket that hid the dangers of the world and swallowed their friends without a trace. But as the news of Arthur's first, miraculous flight began to drift from airfield to airfield, carried on the quiet whispers of the mechanics and the relieved sighs of the commanders, the ice finally began to thaw. The change did not happen with a loud, triumphant roar. It happened in the soft, unnoticed spaces of everyday life. If you were to walk through the long, curved wooden barracks just a few nights after that first successful test, you would hear an entirely different kind of silence. Gone was the tense, waking quiet of frightened boys staring up at the dark wooden rafters, listening to the wind, wondering who would not return tomorrow. In its place was the deep, rhythmic, beautiful sound of young men in true, untroubled sleep. Blankets were rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. The nervous tension that had held their shoulders rigid for months had simply melted away. They knew that when they woke up and climbed into the freezing sky, they would no longer be alone in the gray. They had been given a lantern, and the monsters hiding under the bed of the clouds had suddenly lost their teeth. Let us ride along on one of these new, illuminated flights. We find ourselves inside the cramped, vibrating hull of a heavy patrol plane, flying low over the churning, ink-black waters of the ocean in the dead of night. Outside the thin metal skin of the aircraft, the world is a howling void. There are no stars. There is no moonlight. Just the freezing rain lashing against the glass and the terrifying, endless dark. Sitting in a small, curtained-off compartment behind the pilots is a young navigator named David. A few weeks ago, David's job was an exercise in pure terror. He would have to stare out into the pitch-black night until his eyes watered, searching for the faint, ghostly wake of a submarine or the shadow of an enemy ship, knowing that by the time he saw them, it would already be too late. But tonight, David is not looking out the window. The heavy curtain is pulled shut, sealing him in a small, warm cocoon. He leans forward, resting his chin in his hand, bathed entirely in the soft, emerald glow of a circular glass screen. Deep within the belly of the plane, the little copper labyrinth, carved by the old grandfathers in the dusty workshop, is singing its perfect, silent song. And here, on David's screen, that song is translated into a beautiful, rhythmic sweep of light. Round and round the line of light turns, as reliable and steady as the ticking of an old grandfather clock. David watches the screen with a profound, almost hypnotic sense of peace. He takes a slow sip from a tin thermos of hot tea. The cabin smells of old leather, peppermint leaves from a tin in his pocket, and the faint, warm scent of the glowing electrical tubes. It is cozy. It feels incredibly safe. Suddenly, on the far edge of the glowing green circle, a small, solid pulse of light appears. David's heart does not hammer in his chest. He does not shout in panic. The terrible, adrenaline-fueled chaos of the past is gone. He simply sets down his tin cup, picks up his chinograph pencil, and gently marks the location of the light on the glass. He presses the button on his intercom. "Target spotted," David murmurs, his voice entirely calm, as if he were pointing out a constellation in a summer sky. 2 miles ahead. Port side. Adjusting course. The pilots up front do not flinch. They smoothly turn the heavy yoke, banking the aircraft into the dark. They cannot see a thing outside, but they trust David, and they trust the green light. They glide through the blackness, invisible, silent, holding the ultimate advantage. The hunters who had prowled the dark waters below, so confident in their invisible cloak of night and storm, are suddenly entirely exposed. The sky has been turned. The great, blind expanse has been tamed by a piece of plumbing metal and an elegant equation. When the patrol plane eventually turns back toward home, David watches the coastline appear on his screen long before he can see the cliffs through the fog. He guides them in, thread by invisible thread, until the wheels touch down softly on the wet grass of the runway. As David climbs out of the aircraft, stepping down into the cold morning mist, he takes a deep, lung-filling breath of the damp air. He feels a sudden, overwhelming urge to laugh. It is the giddy, beautiful laughter of a man who has looked into the abyss and realized the abyss is no longer looking back. He claps his gloved hands together, gives a quiet nod of thanks to the grease-stained mechanic waiting by the wing, and walks toward the mess hall with a lightness in his step he hasn't felt since he was a boy. This quiet, profound turning of the tide did not just change the way the men fought, it completely transformed the way they lived. You could see it most clearly in the letters they wrote. For so long, The letters sent back to the small villages and bustling towns of the country were filled with a subtle, veiled melancholy. They were carefully worded goodbyes disguised as cheerful updates. But now, sitting in the warm, wood-paneled corner of the recreation hut, David pulls out a sheet of crisp writing paper and a fountain pen, and he writes of tomorrow. He writes to his mother about the garden she tends behind their house. He tells her to make sure she saves room for the sweet peas this year, because he will be home to help her build the trellis. He writes about the bicycle he left in the shed, asking his younger brother to weld the chain so they can ride down to the river when the summer comes. He is planning for a future that, just a few weeks ago, he was not entirely sure he would get to see. The sheer poetry of these simple, mundane requests is staggering. Every mention of a painted fence, a repaired shoe, or a saved recipe is a quiet, monumental victory over the dark. When we look back on these immense, world-altering periods of history, it can be profoundly moving to ground ourselves in the physical reality of what these people endured. Understanding the vastness of the oceans they crossed and the terrifying emptiness of the skies they flew in helps us truly appreciate the courage it took to just keep going. If you are someone who finds a deep, personal connection to the past through visual storytelling or by holding a piece of history in your own hands, I highly recommend exploring Amazon for carefully curated World War II memorabilia or taking the time to watch the incredible movie Midway on Prime. It beautifully captures the sheer scale and the isolating vastness of fighting across the endless blue. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Bringing these stories to life in your own home is a beautiful way to ensure the sacrifices made in those dark, lonely places are never forgotten. As the weeks gently pass, this new, beautiful certainty begins to settle over the entire nation. Down in the local pubs, hidden away behind thick blackout curtains, the atmosphere changes. The young pilots and navigators gather in the evenings, the fire roaring in the hearth, casting warm, dancing shadows on the worn oak tables. They hold pints of weak, dark ale, their faces flushed with the heat of the fire and the absolute euphoria of survival. They do not boast of grand conquests. They talk about the green screen. They talk about the magic box in the nose of their airplanes. They share stories of slipping through the thickest, most terrifying fog banks, feeling as safe as if they were walking down their own familiar streets in broad daylight. They raise their glasses in the dim light, offering quiet, heartfelt toasts to the unknown. They do not know the name of the rumpled man in the tweed cardigan. They do not know about the dusty, oil-scented workshop in the university town, or the old grandfathers with the silver hair turning the metal lathes in the dead of night. The military has kept the secret locked away tightly. To the boys in the sky, the savior is simply a faceless magician, a brilliant, unseen guardian angel who handed them the keys to the dark. To the boffins, Arthur whispers, clinking his heavy glass against David's, using the affectionate, gentle slang for the scientists they will never meet. God bless the boffins. They take a long, slow drink, savoring the bitter taste of the ale, savoring the warmth of the fire, savoring the simple, extraordinary miracle of being alive to see the end of another day. Far away from the laughter of the pub, in a quiet, windowless bunker deep beneath the cobblestone streets of London, the weary Commander Edward sits at his great wooden map table. The harsh fluorescent lights hum softly overhead. But Edward is not pacing tonight. He is not rubbing his grandfather's brass pocket watch in anxious terror. He is sitting in his creaking wooden chair, leaning back, looking at the map with a soft, peaceful expression. The little wooden blocks that represent the young men he commands are still out there on the painted blue ocean. But they are no longer lost. The chaotic, frantic radio transcripts of boys pleading for a horizon have vanished. The reports crossing his desk are calm, precise, and wonderfully uneventful. The great iron towers on the cliffs are still standing, but they are no longer carrying the burden alone. The sky is full of tiny, singing copper hearts, casting their gentle green nets across the mist. Edward takes off his reading glasses and pinches the bridge of his nose. The deep, bruising exhaustion is still there, settling into his bones, but the despair is gone entirely. He reaches out and gently touches one of the small wooden blocks on the map. He knows that the war is far from over. There will be many more long nights, and many more storms to weather. But the fatal flaw has been mended. The invisible shield has been forged anew, stronger and truer than it ever was before. Outside the bunker, the world continues to turn. The rain falls on the empty streets. The mist clings to the rolling green hills. But up in the vast, endless dark, the shadows have nowhere left to hide. The sky has been turned, and a quiet, brilliant light is finally leading the boys back home. Let us leave them there for now, safe in the warm, sweeping glow of the green screen, flying peacefully through the night. There is a profound, silent weight in carrying a secret that has saved your life. As the deep, freezing winter slowly began to soften into the damp chill of early spring, a new rhythm settled over the coastal airfields. The desperate, panicked scramble of the early days had faded, replaced by a quiet, purposeful calm. The airplanes still roared into the misty skies, and the young men still wrapped themselves in heavy leather and thick wool to brave the dark. But they were no longer flying blind. The miraculous copper hearts were beating steadily inside the noses of their machines, casting their invisible, singing nets into the void. Yet, with this magnificent gift of sight came an incredibly heavy burden. It was the burden of absolute, unbroken silence. The brilliant men in the underground bunkers knew that if the enemy ever discovered the elegant equation, if they ever learned how the copper labyrinth could pierce the fog, the shield would become useless overnight. The magic would be unraveled. And so, the very thing that was keeping thousands of boys alive became the most closely guarded secret of the entire war. It was a secret not kept in vaults or buried in the earth, but kept in the cold steel of the airplanes themselves. Let us return to the drafty, echoing hangars where the rain drums an endless lullaby on the tin roof. Peter, the young mechanic with the grease-stained hands and the quiet, careful soul, is working late into the night. The airfield is asleep, wrapped in a thick blanket of sea fret. Peter stands on a wooden ladder, leaning over the open nose of a heavy patrol bomber. He is not just installing the copper block today, he is entombing it. His fingers, numb from the cold, carefully fit a heavy, reinforced steel casing over the delicate, intricate metal. He tightens the bolts, one by one, sealing the beautiful craftsmanship away from the eyes of the world. But there is one final, terrible step to his work. With immense, trembling care, Peter wires a tiny, hidden explosive charge directly into the casing, connecting it to a heavy, red switch in the cockpit. He knows exactly what this wire means. He has been told in hushed, somber briefings. If the airplane is ever damaged, if it is ever forced to land in the dark fields of hostile territory, the pilot's very last duty, before saving himself, is to press that red switch. He must destroy the copper heart. He must vaporize the magic so that the enemy can never, ever find it. Peter connects the wire and lets out a long, slow breath, a cloud of white mist in the freezing air. He thinks of Arthur and David and all the young men he has come to love like brothers. He is wiring a bomb into their sanctuary. It feels like a betrayal, a harsh intrusion of the war into the one beautiful, safe thing they had been given. He climbs down the ladder, wiping his hands on a rag that is already soaked through with oil. He feels a deep, isolating loneliness. He cannot tell anyone what he has just done. Later that night, sitting on his narrow cot in the barracks, Peter pulls out his writing pad to send a letter to his father, the old clockmaker. The single light bulb above him sways gently in the draft, casting long, lonely shadows across the wooden floorboards. Peter dips his pen into the inkwell, but the words refuse to come. How does he write to the man who taught him to love and respect the delicate balance of machines, and tell him that he is now rigging beautiful instruments to destroy themselves? How does he explain the crushing anxiety of holding the key to the sky, and knowing that one mistake could give it all away? He cannot. The silence demands to be kept. So, Peter writes a letter of ghosts. He writes about the terrible quality of the mess hall tea. He writes about a stray dog that has taken up residence near the hangars. He tells his father that he is safe and that the weather is turning milder. He seals the envelope, pressing his thumb against the wax, feeling the agonizing space between the words he has written and the heavy truth sitting in his chest. This silent, solitary burden was not carried by Peter alone. Up in the sky, the pilots carried it in their own quiet ways. When Arthur flies his night patrols, bathed in the soft, emerald glow of the green screen, he feels an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The invisible waves reach out, touch the shadows, and guide him safely home, night after night. He feels a deep, invisible tether connecting him to the unknown mind that created this lantern. He does not know John's name, nor has he ever seen the dusty workshop in the university town, but he loves the man with a fierce, unspoken devotion. Yet, when Arthur lands, and the mechanics rush out to guide his plane onto the wet grass, he must lock his face into an expression of casual weariness. When he goes home on leave, sitting by the fire in his mother's cozy sitting room, he cannot tell her why he is no longer afraid of the dark. His sister asks him what it is like up there in the clouds. Arthur looks into the dancing flames of the hearth, swirling the tea in his porcelain cup. He wants to tell her about the green light. He wants to tell her about the beautiful, sweeping line that chases away the monsters. He wants to assure her that she never has to worry for him again. But the steel demands silence. "It's just dark, little bird," Arthur whispers softly, offering a brave, empty smile. "Just cold and dark. But we manage." He watches her face fall slightly, the worry creeping back into her eyes. It breaks his heart to keep the comfort of the truth from her, but he knows that keeping the secret is the only way to keep the magic alive. He carries her worry on his own shoulders, adding it to the heavy, silent weight in his chest. This profound separation, the vast, unbridgeable gulf between what was truly happening in the shadows and what the world was allowed to see, was the defining reality for so many who lived through those years. The history we are often taught is wrapped in the neat, polite letters sent home, and the carefully curated photographs released to the public. But the real war, the uncensored, raw, and deeply human struggle, was entirely hidden away. If you find yourself yearning to understand the truth that was kept in the steel, if you want to look past the polished narratives and see the raw, unfiltered reality of what these men and women truly endured in the dark, I have put together something very special. On Gumroad, I have curated a deeply moving collection of unseen media, digital archives filled with raw, unblurred photographs and uncensored accounts that are simply too restrictive and sensitive for this platform. It is a solemn, honest look at the shadows they lived in. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a heavy journey, but for those who wish to honor their true, unspoken sacrifices, it is a beautiful way to bear witness to the secrets they had to keep. Far away from the coastal airfields and the quiet, sleepy university town, the secret was being kept in a different kind of silence. John, the rumpled engineer, sits in his worn armchair by the window of his boarding house. The rain taps softly against the glass, a familiar, comforting rhythm. A small fire crackles in the grate, warming his tired feet. In his lap rests the evening newspaper. The headlines speak of successful patrols, of ships safely escorted through the channel, of the changing momentum of the struggle. There is no mention of copper blocks. There is no mention of green screens or elegant equations. To the rest of the world, it simply seems as though the wind has finally decided to blow in their favor. Mrs. Higgins, his kind landlady, comes into the room carrying a small tray with a steaming pot of tea and a slice of buttered toast. She sets it down on the table beside him, offering a warm, gentle smile. Her face still carries the deep lines of grief from the telegram she received months ago, but the raw, jagged edge of her sorrow has slowly softened into a quiet resignation. Good news in the papers today, Mr. John, she says softly, smoothing her apron. It seems our boys are finding their way home a little better lately. A blessing from the heavens, I suppose. John looks up at her. He looks at the newspaper and then out the window into the misty evening. He knows exactly why the boys are finding their way home. He knows that the blessing did not come from the heavens, but from a spinning metal lathe in a dusty alleyway just down the street. He feels a profound, almost overwhelming urge to tell her. He wants to take her hands and tell her that her boy's loss was not in vain, that it was the very grief in her eyes that pushed him through the exhausted, midnight hours. He wants to tell her that he built a lantern for the rest of them, to ensure no other mother would have to stand weeping by the window. But he cannot. The secret does not just belong to the military, it belongs to the boys in the sky. If he speaks of it, he risks tearing a hole in their invisible shield. So, John simply smiles, a soft, melancholy curve of his lips. He reaches out and gently pats Mrs. Higgins's hand. Yes, John whispers, his voice thick with unspoken emotion. A blessing, Mrs. Higgins. Let us just be thankful they are finding their way out of the dark. She nods, satisfied with his gentle agreement, and quietly leaves the room. John turns his gaze back to the fire, listening to the rain, feeling the quiet, immense satisfaction of a man who has changed the world entirely from the shadows. He does not need medals. He does not need his name in the papers. Knowing that Arthur, and David, and thousands of others are flying safely through the mist is all the reward his quiet heart will ever need. In the evenings, when the pilots gather in the dimly lit, smoke-filled pubs near the airfields, the secret sits heavily among them. They crowd into the wooden booths, their thick coats smelling of damp wool and aviation fuel. They laugh, they sing soft, melancholic songs, and they raise their glasses in the amber light. They talk about the weather, they talk about the girls they left behind, and they talk about the terrible tea in the mess hall. But they never speak the true name of their salvation. When a new boy arrives at the squadron, nervous and pale, terrified of the blinding gray mist, an older pilot will quietly pull him aside. They will stand in the shadows of the hangar, out of earshot of anyone else. The older pilot will not explain the math. He will not explain the physics of the invisible waves or the resonance of the copper. He will simply place a heavy, reassuring hand on the young boy's shoulder. "Don't worry about the fog, lad," he will whisper, a quiet, knowing smile touching his eyes. "The boffins have given us a magic box. You just watch the green light. The light will always bring you home. And that is enough." The young boy will nod, the terror in his chest easing just a fraction, trusting in the quiet confidence of the men who have survived. The secret kept in steel became an unspoken bond, a silent brotherhood woven from copper, electricity, and profound trust. It was a heavy weight to carry, but it was carried with a fierce, protective love. They kept the silence so that the magic could sing, holding the truth close to their beating hearts, allowing the rest of the world to simply sleep peacefully beneath the blackout curtains, entirely unaware of the beautiful, elegant miracle watching over them in the dark. There is a gentle, undeniable rhythm to the world when the heavy tides of fear finally begin to turn. For so long, the dark waters and the misty skies had belonged to the shadows. The nights were a time of holding one's breath, of pulling the heavy blackout curtains tight and praying for the dawn. But slowly, beautifully, a profound shift began to wash over the world. It did not announce itself with the ringing of grand church bells or the loud, brassy marches of a parade. It arrived in the quietest, most tender moments of everyday life. It arrived as a collective, shuddering sigh of relief, breathed out by a nation that finally realized it was going to survive. Let us travel back to the white chalk cliffs, to the damp wooden huts nestled beneath the towering, silent masts. Evelyn, the young woman who had once sat trembling in the dark, watching her screen dissolve into meaningless snow, is still there. She still wears her heavy headset, and the room still smells faintly of ozone and strong tea. But the knot of dread that used to sit heavily in her chest has completely dissolved. Outside, the coastal rain is falling in a steady, drumming rhythm against the reinforced glass. Once, this sound would have terrified her. It would have meant that her eyes were useless, that the boys in the sky were entirely alone. Now, she simply listens to the rain and smiles. She looks down at her screen. The beautiful, emerald sweep of the light traces its steady, rhythmic circle. It cuts through the thickest, heaviest rainstorms without a single stutter. Where there were once ghosts and terrifying blanks, there is now perfect, unyielding clarity. She can see the friendly planes returning from their patrols. She can see the merchant ships moving safely through the black waters. The invisible net is holding strong. Evelyn reaches for a thermos, pouring a warm measure of tea into her tin cup. She watches the green light, feeling an overwhelming, quiet affection for the magic singing inside the machine. She is no longer a helpless watcher in the dark. She is a guardian. When she speaks into her microphone now, her voice is not tight with fear. It is a warm, steady beacon, guiding the tired boys back to the earth, thread by invisible thread. This gentle turning of the tide was felt most deeply out on the vast, freezing expanse of the open ocean. Imagine a sailor standing on the deck of a heavy merchant ship in the dead of night. We will call him Thomas. Thomas is an older man, a father of 3 who has spent his life working the sea. He wears a thick, scratchy wool sweater to keep out the biting wind. For months, crossing this ocean felt like walking through a dark forest filled with unseen wolves. The enemy submarines would wait in the black depths, entirely invisible, rising only in the dead of night to strike before vanishing back into the deep. Thomas leans against the cold iron railing of the ship, looking up at the sky. It is completely overcast. A thick, heavy ceiling of clouds hides the stars. In the past, this unbroken darkness would have terrified him. But tonight, Thomas feels a strange, profound sense of peace. He listens closely. Far above him, completely hidden by the thick, rolling clouds, he hears the low, steady drone of an airplane engine. He cannot see the plane, but he knows it is there. And more importantly, he knows that the boys inside that airplane can see everything. Down in the belly of that hidden plane, the copper heart is singing its perfect note. It is casting its green light over the ocean, sweeping the waters for miles in every direction. If a shadow tries to rise from the depths, if a wolf tries to approach the flock, the green light will catch it long before it can strike. Thomas pulls his pipe from his pocket, tamping down the tobacco with a calloused thumb. He strikes a match, the brief flare illuminating his weathered, smiling face. He knows he is being watched over. He knows that the protective hand of the island has stretched out across the ocean, wrapping around his ship in the dark. He smokes his pipe in the freezing wind, feeling safer than he has in years. This is what a true triumph looks like. It is not found in the crushing defeat of an enemy, but in the quiet restoration of a human soul. It is found in a sailor smoking his pipe in the dark, entirely unafraid. It is found in a young mother sleeping deeply through the night, no longer waking at the sound of the wind. Back on the sprawling, grassy airfields, the atmosphere has completely transformed. The heavy, suffocating weight of grief that used to hang over the long wooden barracks has lifted. Arthur, the young pilot who had flown that terrifying first test flight, walks into the mess hall on a damp, foggy morning. The room is filled with a warm, golden light from the lamps, and the air is thick with the smell of frying bacon, toasted bread, and coffee. What is most beautiful about this room, however, is the noise. It is filled with the loud, joyful, chaotic sound of young men living. There is laughter. There are arguments over card games. There is the scratchy melody of a jazz record playing in the corner. Arthur looks around the room. He looks at the long wooden tables, filled with boys in rumpled uniforms, their hair messy from sleep. He remembers a time when these tables were half empty. He remembers the terrible mornings of folding away the woolen sweaters of those who had slipped into the mist. But this morning, the tables are full. The boys are coming home. Arthur sits down next to Peter, the quiet mechanic with the grease-stained hands. Peter is eating a piece of toast, looking exhausted but deeply content. Arthur nudges Peter's shoulder gently. They don't say anything about the copper block. They don't speak of the secret kept in steel. They simply share a quiet, knowing look. They share the silent, profound triumph of simply being alive to eat breakfast together on a rainy Tuesday. Later that evening, Arthur sits on his bed and writes a letter to his younger sister. He does not write of ghosts or empty promises. The weather has been terrible, he writes, his handwriting smooth and relaxed. Nothing but fog and rain for days. But do not worry, little bird. We do not mind the fog anymore. We have found a way to see right through it. I think the worst of the storm has passed. I am saving my pay, and when I come home, I am going to buy you that blue bicycle we saw in the shop window. Keep the tires pumped for me. These are the unseen, intensely personal victories of the war. They are the moments of quiet resilience, the unsent letters that were finally mailed, and the heavy burdens that were gently set down. History so often smooths over these deeply human experiences, trading the raw, emotional truth of survival for the clean, polished lines of a textbook. But the truth of what these people felt, their deepest fears, their profound relief, their uncensored reality, is the very heartbeat of our past. If you find yourself yearning to step beyond the polished surface, to truly understand the unvarnished history of these shadows, I invite you to join our close-knit history community on Patreon. There, we share completely uncensored deep dives, full, unedited podcast episodes, and a safe space to explore the raw, true stories of everyday heroism. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Joining us there is a beautiful way to ensure these profound, quiet triumphs are never lost to time. Far away from the ocean, far away from the noisy mess halls, John sits in his dusty, oil-scented workshop. The old machinists and watchmakers have gone home for the evening. The metal lathes are silent, their motors cooling in the dim light. The room is empty, save for John and the soft, amber glow of his desk lamp. He is tired. He is so incredibly tired. But it is a good, deep, satisfying exhaustion. He sits at his wooden desk, holding a single, uncarved block of copper in his hand. He traces the smooth, cold metal with his thumb, lost in thought. He has not received a medal. He has not been invited to shake hands with the king. To the world at large, he is just an eccentric, rumpled academic in a tweed cardigan. But John has a wireless radio sitting on the corner of his desk. He turns the small, bakelite dial, listening to the crackle of static until he finds the evening news broadcast. The announcer's voice is crisp and clear, filling the quiet workshop. The news is full of quiet victories. The convoys are arriving safely. The coastal patrols are flawlessly intercepting the shadows in the dark. The tide has undeniably, miraculously turned. John listens, and a soft, gentle smile spreads across his face. He looks at the copper block in his hand. He knows that his elegant equation, his simple, beautiful circles drawn on a piece of scrap paper in the middle of the night, has cast a net of light across the entire world. He closes his eyes and leans his head back against his chair. He can almost hear it. If he listens closely, beneath the sound of the rain outside his window, he can hear the beautiful, harmonic singing of 1,000 tiny copper hearts, echoing through the clouds. He thinks of the boys in the freezing cockpits, wrapped in their heavy coats, following the green light home. He thinks of Mrs. Higgins, his landlady, sleeping peacefully downstairs, no longer dreading the knock of the telegraph boy at her door. John gently sets the copper block down on the desk. He reaches over and clicks off the amber lamp, plunging the workshop into the soft, comforting darkness of the evening. He does not fear the dark anymore either. He has given the world a lantern, and the light is holding strong. He wraps his scarf around his neck, steps out into the cool, misty air, and begins the quiet walk home, his footsteps echoing softly on the ancient cobblestones, leaving the tide of triumphs to gently wash over the sleeping world. There is a ringing in the ears that only comes when a terrible noise finally, wonderfully stops. For years, the world had lived beneath the heavy, suffocating roar of the storm. It was a noise made of vibrating airplane engines, howling sirens, and the crackle of anxious voices over radio static. It was the sound of a nation holding its breath in the dark. But then, almost as if a great, invisible hand had reached down and gently turned the page of the world, the storm broke. The heavy gray clouds that had clung so desperately to the cliffs finally parted, giving way to a vast, unbroken canopy of brilliant, quiet blue. The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick, golden, and profoundly heavy with relief. Let us return to the white chalk cliffs, to the damp wooden huts that had served as the eyes of the island for so long. Evelyn, the young woman who had spent her youth staring into the eerie green glow of a glass screen, is sitting at her station one last time. But today, she is not searching for ghosts. She is not tracing the shadows of a threat. She reaches out and, with a slow, deliberate motion, flips the heavy metal switch on her console. The low hum of the machinery winds down, softening into a gentle sigh. The beautiful, sweeping green light that had saved so many lives shrinks into a tiny, bright, in the center of the glass, and then slowly fades away into complete darkness. Evelyn takes off her heavy headset and rests it gently on the wooden desk. She rubs her tired eyes, and for the first time in years, she notices the sound of the seabirds calling outside her window. She notices the gentle rhythm of the waves lapping against the base of the cliffs. The war is over. The vigil is done. Evelyn stands up, her chair scraping softly against the floorboards. She walks out of the dim hut and steps into the warm sunlight. She closes her eyes, tilting her face upward, feeling the heat of the sun on her skin, breathing in the salty, peaceful air of a world that is finally safe. Miles away, on the sprawling grassy airfields, that same beautiful silence has settled over the hangars. The great airplanes are parked in long, perfectly still rows, their engines cold. Arthur, the young pilot who had trusted his life to the singing Copper Heart, is standing beside his aircraft. He is not wearing his heavy leather jacket or his fleece-lined boots. He wears a simple, soft woolen sweater. He runs his hand gently along the cold metal of the airplane's nose, right where the secret had been kept hidden in steel. He thinks of the freezing nights, the blinding fog, and the pure, terrifying vastness of the dark. He thinks of how the green light had always guided him back to the earth, like a faithful friend reaching through the mist. Peter, the mechanic with the grease-stained hands, walks over to him. Peter is carrying a small, wooden toolbox. He sets it down in the grass and looks up at the airplane. The dark circles under Peter's eyes have begun to fade, replaced by a quiet, exhausted peace. They do not say much to one another. The bond between a pilot and the man who keeps him in the sky is something that transcends ordinary language. Arthur simply reaches out and pulls the young mechanic into a tight, fiercely grateful embrace. He holds him there for a long moment, communicating 1,000 unspoken thank yous for every wire checked, every bolt tightened, and every sleepless night spent guarding the magic. When they pull away, Peter offers a small, wavering smile, picks up his toolbox, and walks slowly back toward the barracks to pack his things. He is going back to his father, the old clockmaker. He is going back to a world where machines are used to tell time, not to search the dark. Arthur turns his back to the airplane and begins to walk toward the gates of the airfield. In his pocket rests a train ticket, punched and ready. He touches the small wooden sparrow his grandfather had carved for him, rubbing its smooth wings with his thumb. The terrible weight of the sky has finally been lifted from his shoulders. He is going home. Far beneath the cobblestone streets of London, in the hidden, windowless bunkers, the war is ending in a different way. The weary commander, Edward, stands alone in the cavernous map room. The harsh fluorescent lights have been dimmed. The room is quiet, lacking the frantic energy of running messengers and ringing telephones. Edward walks slowly around the great wooden table. He reaches out and gently picks up one of the small, painted wooden blocks that had represented the young men flying over the ocean. He holds it in his palm, feeling its smooth, worn edges. So many boys had been saved by the elegant equation. So many mothers would not have to weep by their windows. With immense care, Edward begins to clear the table. He places the wooden blocks into a velvet-lined box, one by one. As he works, he feels a profound physical change in his own body. The knot of anxiety that had lived in his stomach for years begins to unravel. The deep, bruising exhaustion in his bones feels lighter. He closes the lid of the box, fastens the brass clasp, and walks toward the heavy steel door. He climbs the concrete steps, moving upward, away from the buried world, until he pushes open the heavy iron gate and steps out onto the city streets. The sunlight hits him, bright and glorious. The streets are filled with people walking freely, without the shadow of fear haunting their steps. Edward takes a slow, deep breath of the city air. He pulls his grandfather's brass pocket watch from his trousers, checking the time. The hands sweep forward. Time is no longer slipping away from him, it is stretching out, warm and endless. As the world outside begins to celebrate, the military begins the quiet, methodical work of locking its secrets away. The beautiful copper labyrinths, the singing hearts that had turned the tide, are carefully uninstalled, boxed up, and buried deep within classified archives. The men who flew with them are ordered to never speak of the green light. The world is allowed to believe in the triumph of traditional steel and courage, while the true magic is quietly ushered into the shadows. It is a fascinating, bittersweet reality of history that some of the most profound miracles are the ones the world is never allowed to see. The true stories of resilience, the secret inventions, and the quiet heroism of everyday people are so often locked away in dusty files. If you find yourself captivated by these hidden truths, and if you have a deep desire to explore the silent, unwritten chapters of the past, I would love to share a quiet corner of history with you. I write a weekly email newsletter dedicated to uncovering these forgotten stories, exploring the uncensored, human side of the years that shaped our world. When you join our little community, I will send you a free copy of my ebook, The Shadow War: 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. It is filled with incredible, true accounts of the quiet magic that happened entirely in the dark. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a wonderful, safe way to keep the memory of these hidden minds alive. While the military sealed away its secrets, in the quiet university town, the architect of the miracle was packing away his own life. The rain that had washed the cobblestones for so long had finally stopped. The air in the dusty, oil-scented workshop was warm and still. John, the rumpled engineer with the brilliant, unbound mind, is standing by his wooden workbench. He is not wearing a uniform covered in medals. He is wearing his same, soft tweed cardigan. The old men, the grandfathers, the retired machinists, and the watchmakers who had turned the metal lathes through the midnight hours are gathering their tools. They wrap their hardened steel cutting bits in oiled cloths. They sweep the last of the beautiful, golden copper shavings from the floorboards. They do not ask for recognition. They know what they have done. An old man with silver hair and thick spectacles walks over to John. He does not salute. He simply extends a calloused, trembling hand. John takes it, gripping it warmly. "We made them sing, lad," the old man whispers, a soft, tearful smile touching his eyes. "We made them sing." John nods, his throat too tight with emotion to speak. He watches the old men quietly file out of the workshop, stepping out into the warm afternoon sun, returning to their quiet, ordinary lives. John turns back to his desk. Sitting next to a stack of complex mathematical papers is the very first prototype. The bruised, iridescent block of copper that had survived the terrifying power of the testing bay. It is silent now. It is cold to the touch. He picks it up, turning it over in his hands, tracing the delicate, interlocking chambers one last time. He thinks of the sheer, elegant beauty of the equation. He thinks of how the universe had offered a simple, graceful answer to an impossibly dark question. He wraps the copper block gently in a clean white cloth, tying it with a piece of brown string. He places it deep inside his worn leather satchel, buckling the straps tight. He puts on his coat, winds his scarf around his neck, and turns off the amber desk lamp. As he walks out of the workshop, locking the heavy wooden door behind him, he feels entirely at peace. He will return to his books. He will return to his chalkboards and his sleepy classrooms. To the students who will pass him in the halls, he will just be a quiet, eccentric professor. But he knows the truth. He knows that he gave the world back its dawn. Mrs. Higgins, his landlady, is waiting for him on the porch of the boarding house. She is sweeping the steps, a soft hum escaping her lips. When she sees John approach, she stops and leans against her broom. "The weather has turned out lovely, hasn't it, Mr. John?" she asks, her eyes bright. "It has, Mrs. Higgins," John replies, a genuine, warm smile spreading across his face. "It is a beautiful day for a walk." And far away from the quiet university, at the end of a long, winding country lane, a train slowly pulls into a small village station. Arthur steps down onto the wooden platform. He carries a single canvas duffel bag over his shoulder. The air here smells of blooming jasmine, wet earth, and sweet grass. He walks down the familiar dirt road, his heart beating a fast, joyful rhythm in his chest. He turns the corner, and there it is. The small cottage with the climbing roses. The wooden gate with the chipped white paint. Sitting on the front porch, reading a book in the sunlight, is his younger sister. She looks up as the latch of the gate clicks open. The book tumbles from her lap. She runs down the stone path, her footsteps light and desperate, throwing her arms around Arthur's neck. Arthur drops his bag, catching her, holding her tightly against him. He buries his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of home. He looks over her shoulder, toward the small wooden shed at the side of the house. Leaning against the wall, gleaming in the sun, is a brand new, bright blue bicycle. The storm is over. The silence has settled. The sky has been returned to the birds and the clouds, and the monsters in the dark have faded into memory. It is the end of a long, terrifying chapter, but as Arthur holds his sister in the warmth of his own garden, it feels entirely, beautifully like the beginning. Time is a quiet thief, slipping away with our loudest triumphs and leaving behind only the softest echoes. When the great, terrible storm finally broke and the world learned how to breathe again, history began to write its pages. History, you see, is often a very loud and boisterous storyteller. It loves the grand parades, the shimmering brass medals pinned to the chests of stern-faced generals, and the dramatic signing of papers in vast, gilded halls. It loves the sweeping maps with their bold, shifting lines. But history, in its rush to celebrate the loud, so often forgets the quiet. It forgets the dusty, oil-scented workshops. It forgets the tired men in rumpled cardigans, and the midnight hours spent staring at a blank piece of paper. Let us walk, once more, through the cobblestone streets of the sleepy university town. Years have passed since the rain lashed against the windows and the dark felt so heavy. It is autumn now. The air is crisp, smelling of wood smoke and fallen, golden leaves. The students bustling across the courtyards are young, their faces bright and entirely unburdened by the shadows of the past. In a small, wood-paneled classroom at the end of a long hallway, John is wiping a chalkboard clean with a felt eraser. His hair, once a dusty, rumpled gray, is now completely, beautifully white. He wears a soft tweed jacket, the elbows patched with leather, and his eyes still hold that same, gentle warmth. The bell rings, and a dozen students gather their books, chatting happily as they file out the door. They brush past him with polite nods. "Good afternoon, Professor," they say. John smiles and nods in return. They do not know. They could not possibly know. To them, he is just a kindly old man who teaches the complex, dry language of mathematics. They do not know that the very sky they walk beneath, the very peace they are so freely enjoying, was forged in his mind. The secret of the copper labyrinth was kept so perfectly, so entirely within the vaults of the military and the silent brotherhood of the pilots, that the world simply moved on without ever learning his name. John walks over to his heavy oak desk and sits down in the worn leather chair. He opens the bottom drawer. Tucked away in the very back, resting beneath a stack of old examination papers, is a small bundle wrapped in white cloth. He reaches back and pulls it out, resting it on the polished wood of his desk. He unwraps the cloth with slow, trembling fingers. There it is. The original copper block. The elegant equation made real. The metal that sang in the dark. It is completely silent now. The iridescent bruises along its edges, where it was tempered by the raw, terrifying fire of the testing bay, have faded slightly with time. It is cool to the touch. John traces the hollow, carved chambers with his thumb. He feels no bitterness. He feels no anger that his name is not carved into marble monuments in the city squares. He looks at this heavy, beautiful piece of metal, and he feels only a profound, oceanic peace. He did not build it for glory. He built it for the girl staring at the snowy screen. He built it for the boy shivering in the blinding mist. He built it because the world was broken, and he happened to know how to fix it. That, he realizes, is the purest form of love a person can give to a world that will never know them. But as the years gently drift by, the memories begin to fade, like an old photograph left in the sun. Down the street, past the baker and the old clockmaker's shop, the small, drafty workshop in the alleyway has been turned into a storage room. The heavy metal lathes are gone. The old men, the grandfathers who had left their warm hearths to spin the metal through the midnight hours, have slowly, quietly begun to pass away. Let us think of one of them. We will call him William. He was the machinist with the silver hair who had placed his calloused hand on John's shoulder and promised to make the metal sing. William passes away peacefully in his sleep, sitting in his favorite velvet armchair by the fire. A few days later, his daughter is quietly sorting through his things. The house is silent, filled with the heavy, sweet scent of old potpourri and furniture polish. She opens a small wooden box on his workbench, looking for keepsakes. Inside the box, resting on a bed of faded velvet, is a small, glass jar. It is filled with a handful of tiny, curled, golden ribbons of metal. Copper shavings. She holds the jar up to the light, turning it in her hands. The metal catches the sun, gleaming beautifully. She has no idea what they are. She does not know that these shavings fell from the very first heart of the machine that turned the tide of the world. She does not know that her father swept them up from the floorboards, keeping them as a silent, fiercely proud reminder of his own hidden heroism. To her, they are just pretty scraps of metal from an old man's hobby. She smiles softly, thinking of her father's love for tinkering, places the jar back in the box, and closes the lid. The history is there, brilliant and true, but the context has vanished into the mist. The blueprint is forgotten. It is a deeply melancholic thought, the idea that so much profound bravery and brilliant sacrifice simply slips between the cracks of time. The greatest stories are so often the ones that are never written down, carried only in the silent hearts of the people who lived them, until those hearts finally stop beating. This is why we gather here, in the quiet of the night, to whisper these stories back to life. It takes a gentle, deliberate effort to sift through the dust of the past, to find the glass jars of copper shavings, and to remember what they truly mean. If you find comfort in these quiet corners of history, and if you believe in the importance of remembering the unseen heroes, I would be incredibly grateful for your help. I have a small tip jar on Ko-Fi to support the deep research and the delicate care it takes to keep this history alive. Even the smallest gesture ensures that these forgotten blueprints are never truly lost. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Together, we can make sure the quietest voices are finally heard. Far away from the university town, the young men who flew with the green light are no longer young. Arthur sits on the front porch of his home on a warm summer evening. His hair is thinning, and the lines around his eyes have deepened. He sits in a rocking chair, listening to the crickets beginning their nightly song in the tall grass. Sitting on his knee is his young granddaughter. She is playing with a small, worn wooden sparrow, tracing its curved wings with her tiny fingers. The sky above them is beginning to cloud over. A soft, gray mist is creeping in from the horizon, blurring the edges of the setting sun. Arthur looks up at the clouds. He feels a sudden, phantom chill in his bones, an echo of the freezing cockpit from decades ago. But it is only an echo. The terror is gone. "Grandpa," the little girl asks, looking up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Were you ever scared of the dark?" Arthur looks down at her. He smiles, a slow, gentle curve of his lips. He wraps his large, warm hand over her tiny one, enclosing the wooden sparrow. "I was, little bird," Arthur whispers, his voice thick with a sudden, overwhelming wave of nostalgia. "Once upon a time, the dark was very big and very cold. And we were entirely lost in it." "How did you find your way out?" she asks, leaning her head against his chest. Arthur closes his eyes. He tries to find the words. How does he explain the terrifying vastness of the ocean, the blinding fog, and the desperate prayers? How does he explain the magic of the singing metal, and the beautiful, perfect green light that chased the monsters away? He realizes, with a quiet pang of sorrow, that he cannot. The reality of that time is too immense, too harsh, and too deeply personal to translate into a bedtime story. To her, it would only ever sound like a fairy tale. "A friend gave us a lantern," Arthur says simply, opening his eyes and looking back up at the gathering mist. "A very smart, very quiet friend gave us a magic light. And the light brought us home." The little girl smiles, satisfied with the story, and closes her eyes, lulled to sleep by the slow rocking of the chair and the steady rhythm of her grandfather's heartbeat. Arthur continues to rock. He looks out into the gray evening. He does not know John's name, and John does not know his. But in this quiet moment, the bond between them is as strong as the day the copper was carved. The blueprint may be forgotten by the grand history books, but it lives on in the rhythmic breathing of the child sleeping on his chest. It lives on in the simple, breathtaking fact that they survived. Sometimes, the greatest legacy a person can leave behind is a world that does not even realize it was saved. Let us leave them here in the twilight. Arthur rocking his granddaughter on the porch. The old machinist's daughter safely keeping a jar of golden dust. And John, the quiet genius in the rumpled cardigan, closing his classroom door, wrapping his scarf against the autumn chill, and walking home under a beautifully clear, boundless, and entirely peaceful sky. Everything that is built to fight the dark eventually yields to the slow, gentle embrace of the earth. Let us return to the edge of the world. Stand with me, one last time, on the high, white chalk cliffs of the southern coast. The bruised, terrifying purple twilight of 1940 is long gone. Today, the sky is a vast, watercolor wash of pale blue and soft, blushing pink as the sun begins its slow descent toward the horizon. The wind coming off the English Channel is no longer a biting harbinger of an unseen storm. It is a gentle breeze, smelling warmly of salt spray, wild thyme, and sun-baked grass. If you walk along the uneven edge of these cliffs, letting the tall, wild grass brush against your fingertips, you will eventually come across them. The great iron towers. They are still here, standing like ancient, sleeping sentinels against the sky. But they are no longer humming with invisible, anxious energy. They are silent. The steel girders, once sharp and pristine, have been kissed by decades of salty sea air. They are beautifully, richly covered in a thick coat of dark orange rust. Wild ivy has begun to slowly creep up their massive legs, weaving a delicate, green tapestry through the cold metal. Small coastal birds have built their nests in the highest, forgotten observation platforms, raising their young in the very places where young men once strained their eyes against the terrifying dark. Nature is quietly, patiently reclaiming the machinery of war. Beneath the towering masts, the small wooden huts are little more than hollow shells. The doors have long since rotted away, and the reinforced glass windows have been shattered by time and winter storms. If you step inside one of these hushed, shadowy spaces, there is no green light. There is no smell of ozone or strong, bitter tea. There is only the soft carpet of moss on the floorboards and the quiet hum of a bumblebee drifting through the empty doorway. But if you close your eyes and listen closely, you might still feel the faint, echoing presence of Evelyn. You might imagine the young girl with the tired eyes, tracing the frantic blips of static on her screen, writing small notes of comfort to her friends in the dim light. She is not a ghost of sorrow, she is a memory of profound, quiet resilience. The hut is empty now because Evelyn did her job. She held the line until the magic arrived, and then she was allowed to go home. The silence in this wooden room is the greatest victory she could have ever asked for. Further inland, the sprawling, damp airfields have undergone their own quiet transformation. The heavy, corrugated tin hangars where Peter the mechanic used to work with his grease-stained hands have been taken down or repurposed into quiet, dusty barns for local farmers. The wide, grassy runways where Arthur's heavy airplane once surged into the blinding mist are now dotted with grazing sheep, moving slowly across the clover in the afternoon sun. The great, roaring machines that flew from those fields are mostly gone. They were dismantled, their metal melted down and turned into the mundane, beautiful objects of peacetime: bicycles, washing machines, the structural beams of new homes built for the returning boys. And what of the secret kept in steel? What of the little copper labyrinths that sang so perfectly in the dark? A few of them sit quietly behind the thick glass cases of museums, resting on beds of blue velvet, accompanied by small, neatly typed placards that try to explain the elegant equation in simple terms. But most of them are lost to the quiet corners of the world. They sit in dusty attics, tucked away in old canvas duffel bags. They rest on the top shelves of grandfather's closets, entirely unremarkable to the children who occasionally find them. They look like heavy paperweights, or strange pieces of antique plumbing. They have returned to being just metal, because the world no longer needs them to sing. It is a deeply moving experience to stand in the presence of these aging relics. To touch the flaking rust of a great tower, or to hold a cold, silent piece of wartime metal in your hands, is to physically touch the courage of the past. These artifacts are the anchors that keep the fading echoes of history tethered to our modern world. If you are someone who finds a deep, grounding peace in preserving these tangible memories, and who wishes to honor the vast, sweeping reality of what these men and women endured, I highly recommend exploring Amazon for authentic World War II memorabilia, or immersing yourself in beautifully crafted visual histories like the movie Midway on Prime. It is a powerful way to bring the sheer scale and the profound human emotion of those years into your own home. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Holding onto these pieces of the past ensures that their quiet heroism does not entirely rust away into forgotten earth. The true legacy of the invisible shield, however, is not found in the metal. It is found in the flesh, in the blood, and in the quiet, beautifully ordinary lives of the people who survived. Think of Peter, the young mechanic who had wept on the floor of the hangar. When the green light finally pierced the fog, After the storm broke, Peter did not stay with the great airplanes. He packed his small wooden toolbox and went back to his father's shop. His hands, once stained with the heavy, black grease of war, returned to the delicate, meticulous work of oiling the tiny, golden gears of pocket watches. He spent his life listening to the soothing, rhythmic ticking of time passing safely. He married, he raised children, and he grew old in a world that allowed him the profound privilege of a quiet life. Think of Arthur, the pilot who had gripped his grandfather's wooden sparrow in the freezing cockpit, terrified of the blinding gray mist. Arthur never forgot the beautiful, emerald sweep of the light that brought him home. But he did not spend his life looking back at the sky. He kept his promise to his younger sister. He bought her the blue bicycle. He planted sweet peas in the garden. He became a teacher, or a baker, or a quiet man who simply loved to sit on his porch in the evening and watch the stars emerge without a single ounce of fear in his heart. These men and women did not ask to be part of a grand, historical epic. They simply wanted to live. Their greatest triumph was not a medal pinned to their chest. It was the quiet, mundane beauty of a Tuesday morning. It was the ability to drink a cup of tea that wasn't brewed in a freezing mess hall. It was the joy of watching their children sleep without having to pull a heavy blackout curtain across the window. They became the quiet foundation upon which a new, peaceful world was built. They carried their memories, their private fears, and their unspeakable losses entirely within themselves, choosing to offer their children only the light. And then, there is John. The quiet, eccentric mind unbound. The rumpled engineer who had stared into the darkness of his dusty workshop and decided to make the mist sing. John's life after the war remained exactly as it had been before. He returned to his university. He wore his thick tweed cardigans with the missing buttons. He taught his complex, elegant equations to classrooms full of students who had no idea they were being instructed by the man who had picked the lock of the sky. He never sought the spotlight. When the military eventually declassified the secrets of the copper block, there were a few articles in the newspapers, a few polite nods from the academic community. But John waved away the praise with a gentle, humble smile. To him, the true reward had already been given. The reward was the silence of the telegram boy on Mrs. Higgins's front porch. When John eventually passed away, he did so quietly, surrounded by the towering stacks of books he loved so dearly. There was no grand state funeral. There was no roaring flyover of military airplanes to mark his departure. He slipped away into the quiet, exactly as he had lived. But if you want to see John's true monument, you do not need to look for a marble statue in a city square. You simply need to look around you. His monument is the millions of people walking the earth today who exist simply because a young boy in a freezing airplane was guided safely back to the runway by a green light. His legacy is the generations of laughter, of love, of entirely ordinary lives lived by the descendants of the men who were not swallowed by the gray fog. The elegant equation he carved into the copper is still echoing, invisibly, in the steady, peaceful heartbeat of the world. As the sun finally dips below the horizon, the white chalk cliffs are bathed in the soft, silver light of the moon. The ocean below whispers its eternal, soothing rhythm against the ancient rocks. The rusting iron towers cast long, gentle shadows across the tall grass. They are at peace. The wooden huts are empty, and the airfields are asleep. The story of the broken shield, the desperate search, and the tiny, singing metal heart is complete. It has been tucked away into the quiet corners of history, a gentle bedtime story of everyday heroism and quiet resilience. You can close your eyes now. The storm that raged so fiercely in the dark has been over for a very long time. The watchmen have all gone home, their vigils ended, their burdens gently set down. The night is clear. The stars are bright and perfectly visible, mapping out a sky that holds no shadows, no ghosts, and no fear. It is just you, the soft sound of the ocean, and the comforting, unbroken silence of a world at peace. Rest well. Sleep deeply. And good night.